Okay, so let's see, is the audio working here? Okay, so that seems to be working. So let's get this open to actually start this. Okay, let's get going here. So yeah, I'm going to do the patterns in time stuff first. Then we'll go on to the Avatar Studios rumor discussion. But first, I think we probably should talk about some of the kind of more like very recent news that I haven't actually covered in videos yet. So what do we got here? This one. Probably should talk about this. Unfortunately, first delay of the year. Bound to happen. The Chibi comic has been delayed. As you can see here, the mass market date has been pushed back from the 31st of January to the 28th of March. So like 2 full months basically for that. Now it does seem to be this weird delay thing that we got right at the end of the year where it is only affecting one distributor so far. So right now this seems to be the Random House distributor, which is for the bookstores, but the comic store stuff isn't affected. Hopefully that gets sorted out as the year goes on, because we do not want what happened to like this book and some of the books at the end of last year to happen to like the Azula comic. I think that would be the worst thing to happen for such a hyped book, is for it to have that weird split release where potentially some people are reading it like weeks before other people. That sort of messed up the patterns in time sort of like release schedule. The way it worked out, it wasn't great. And then the other thing to remember, of course, with this is that this was originally scheduled for July 2021. So it's not a good start to the year at all. I'm not sure what's happened with this book. I can't imagine that this book was affected like much by Avatar Studios or anything like that, because I'm assuming this was just the way it was all the way through. Yes, it has the same kind of problem of the marketing of behind it is a bit weird, in that, like, having read the book, the description isn't the most representative of the book, but it's not like exactly like inaccurate like the whole Mako Bolin in Patterns in Time is. So not sure what the situation here is at all. It's especially because like I have got the preview. The way I usually kind of judge it is that delays that happen after they've put out review copies are the ones that are very much out of the hands of the publisher. Like, they really couldn't account for that. That if one of the distributors for the bookstores is having problems and are like 2 months behind, Dark Horse can't really do much there. And I kind of get that. I'd be more concerned with this book about like sort of why it was delayed from July into 2022 in the first place, and then why it ended up like in the free comic book, and then why from there it's now ended up in the start of this year. This last date is, I think, a little bit more understandable. So there's that. And then, yes, still no listings for the Azula comic is a little bit weird in my mind. Now, to be fair, I'm guessing that means there potentially isn't a book for this month in solicitations if the release date stuff has been updated. There's still, I suppose, potentially like next week and the week afterwards for January solicits to come out. I'd have to look up that stuff. I think it's usually more in the middle of the month. But realistically, I think the Azula comic has to be announced probably this month or next month if it's going to actually hit some sort of a summer release date type thing. Because at this stage I'm leaning towards probably late summer, probably like July, maybe even August. I don't know how that book is going to be affected by delays. We know it's a consistent creative team, so we assume they'll have the book done on time and stuff like that, but it's obviously the behind the scenes and the kind of distribution stuff that's the main problem here for sure. So it's just waiting to see what happens here. Definitely. There's that. That's interesting. I hadn't seen that yet. Anyone seen Peter Wortman's tweet that he's working on a script, but it's the standard 72 pages? That's interesting, because he does write comics. He's the writer on the first Dragon Prince comic, and I think the upcoming one, I think he's the writer. So he does do writing as well as art. So it'll be interesting if they're actually letting him write some Avatar stuff. That would be interesting. But we'll have to wait and see what's happening there, and see what happens. Again, it's one of those things where, like, Patterns in Time, we're going to discuss it shortly. They often use those as kind of like, auditions for like different creators. So who knows, maybe they have one of those artists lined up for maybe him to do a comic and reverse it that way, but we have to wait and see. Other quick thing I want to talk about is just this, the other Schwartz card that got revealed. So this is a promo for winning a tournament over the next couple of months in Schwartz. But it is our first look at a card with an effect, which is kind of interesting. So it gives you a sense for, like, how it's going to look, especially if you're only getting into Schwartz through Avatar stuff. It's obviously best to go off the Avatar cards and what they're doing. So just a little bit of a breakdown here on this. So the card is called Katara Desire to Help. So what that means, of course, is that there's going to be a lot of other Katara cards with different names and stuff like that. So this is just specifically Katara Desire to Help. You can see the tags down here: World of Avatar and Water Tribe. That's what effects will relate to. Like, her own effect references World of Avatar a couple of times, but doesn't mention Water Tribe. But it probably likely means there will be at least a couple of effects in the set that are specifically Water Tribe, and then there'll be like Fire Nation and other stuff like that. In my experience, they don't tend to go overly tribal in Schwartz. So making a deck that is very, very focused on cards focused on the Water Tribe tag, I think might be a little bit difficult to do, in that you'll probably just have to use blue cards, which will probably also have most of the Water Tribe tags in it. But anyway, 2 soul, so it does 2 damage, and that's fitting for a level 3 card. 2 cost is also very, very standard for that. But interestingly, it is, based on its first effect, it is a kind of level reducing card. So if you have 4 Avatar characters on the stage, this card gets -1 level while in the hand. So it's actually more like a 2/2 most of the time, because it's relatively easy to spam the field with any random cards. So you should pretty much always be playing this card as a level 2, which is sort of fitting because it is 8,500. Most level 3s are typically like 10,000, maybe 10,500. 8,500 is obviously to balance it, given that it can come out earlier. It does get this interesting kind of more defensive effect here, where when you put it on the stage, if you have another character as well, just one other character, it gets power, but not on your turn, during your opponent's turn. Now, defensive stuff in Schwartz is interesting in that they can still ram really low power cards into this to do damage. They will be like basically sacrificed in doing that. But having giant numbers doesn't mean as much in Schwartz. It's good if you can do it, but it's not like necessarily like a strategy that you go for like a lot of the time, just because you can sort of guarantee damage. Like, basically, if you attack, you'll typically most of the time get damage through. So it's interesting. That means it's not the most powerful card for sure. And then its final ability is discard a card from your hand when you play it, and you can put the top card of your clock into your stock. Translated into understandable kind of wording there, that means you heal yourself 1 damage, and that card that represents that damage goes into your energy, basically. So you have to pay 2 energy to play this card. You get energy by attacking. This heals you 1 to get 1 energy, so it's pretty decent. But a lot of level 3s in the game are going to have abilities like this. You would expect a lot of the level 3s to do some sort of like 1 healing, and then the clock to stock is also a pretty common thing. So the uniqueness here, I think, is more the level kind of modulation thing. This effect feels fitting for like a card that is basically, for most people, you're probably going to have a hard time getting this into your collection because it's for winning a regional. But I assume there'll be at least a couple of Kataras across like the trial deck and the main set that are also like level 3 and powerful and better than this. But it's just nice to actually see a card for the first time, because we're probably not going to get more looks at cards until like the winter conference for Bushiroad, whenever that happens. And then they're probably not going to start reveal season for this until probably like May. So just keep that in mind. But let's get to patterns in time. So weird kind of book to kind of be talking about this in January, because of course, like, I first read this book in like late September, I think was when I got my review copy for this. It was either that or early October. So I've had this book, I've been dealing with this book for quite a couple of months now. But obviously a lot of that time it was pretty much just me on my own, because no one else had read the book. And then when it finally did come out, you had the people who got it from comic book stores, and then await again until right at the end of the year for people to actually get the book when it finally released like mass market in bookstores. It was like December 20th by the time that happened. And at that point, the reason I'm not doing this live stream in December is because the timing just didn't work out that well. It was a pretty bad time to kind of generate hype and discussion around one of these books. So it was an interesting kind of thing. And that's the thing with this book, is just that, like, it's the only Korra content that we basically got this year. Yes, there's the free comic book day book, but like, it wasn't the most amazing story there either. Either way, it was all short story content this year. And even if you include the year before, we also didn't really have any Korra content. So this had quite a job to do, because it was basically the first Korra content in a very, very long time. And getting into it, you can see, of course, for anyone who's unaware, it's 8 stories. 3 of them are reprints and 5 of them are new. And we've known that for quite a while, but the problem is, when I say we, I mean the sort of hardcore fandom who keeps up with the comics. A lot of the fandom didn't know anything about this book, apart from they knew what the cover was, and occasionally they knew when the release date of the book was. Most people had no clue what was actually in this book until it actually came out, because it was heavily delayed and it was poorly marketed. And these are 2 things that do affect the book. Like, in my mind, I've not seen Dark Horse kind of get it so wrong on the marketing department with a book as they did with this one, especially because it was their only like new Avatar book in 2022. It was crazy to me that it was basically fans telling other fans what's actually in the book. Like, I think like I did more marketing for this book than Dark Horse did, in terms of like revealing like interesting information about this book. And that's not even like over exaggerating, because it just feels like I did. And you even note that like when Dark Horse did finally start to like post about it on social media, they edited what it says on the back of the book so that they didn't mention Mako and Bolin, because the big problem with the marketing here is that the book directly says Mako and Bolin are in this book, when they're just not at all. And they switched it to being like Korra, Asami, and others, and left out the whole inclusion of Mako and stuff like that. So it was an example of like, they realized like, oh, we kind of have to do this as well. So that was kind of weird. Just that, how did they get it so wrong? The other kind of, the other part of it is just that people expected this to have certain stories in it based off the cover and stuff like that. Now, look, the cover point is like, it is what it is. It's a symbolic cover. Like, was anyone actually expecting like a Korra and Asami story that like involved Rava? Like, I know I kind of really wasn't. I always was looking at this as more of a symbolic cover. But I did expect there to be more Korra and Asami, and more Korra Asami content than there actually was in the book. Because when you really break it down, there's what, like 2 pages? Like at a stretch, you say the entire story of A Change in the Wind. But really, it's like just the very start of that is like Korra Asami focused. The other part of this is, of course, that this book has been in the planning since before Avatar Studios was announced. They said that at, what was it, New York Comic Con, I think. Which is sort of crazy because this book was announced publicly. We knew about this book from December 2021, meaning that they were working on this book like a year before they even announced it. And at least based off like at least one or two of the stories, we know that it seems like quite a bit of editing and changes happened in the early stages of planning on this book, because at the very least, Rachel Silverstein said that her book, The Skyscrapers story with Asami and Yasuko, she said she had to completely write that, rewrite that from what her original script was compared to what actually came out in the book. And she said her actual story was much darker and it had to be completely redone. So, you know, Avatar Studios came in and did it change what this book was. Like maybe there was a Mako and Bolin story planned in this initially, but it got, taken out. Because it is a weird lineup of stories. Like we'll get to it in a second. I'll actually just scroll down to it right now because I have it at the end of this list. So if you just look at sort of like character focus across all the stories. Okay, Korra is a focus in like 2 of the stories. Young Korra is a focus in 2 stories. Asami's a focus in 1 story. Young Asami in another. Milo's the focus of 2 stories. Yasuko in 1. Lahima is the focus in 1 story. Janora in 1. Tenzin in 1. Aang in 1. Bumi in 1. And then, of course, 0 for Mako and Bolin. And there's other stuff as you go through it like that, and you really just notice that, like, what a weird breakdown that's in this book. The mix of stories as we'll go through it is very odd, so on. And yeah, how does Milo get more pages than Mako and Bolin? Yeah, that's the big thing. Like, Milo has the most pages in the entire book, as we'll get to, because I have the amount of pages per book listed here. So if we get into the first one, Friends for Life, and I never talked about this in any of my reviews because this is from the 2016 or 17 Free Comic Book Day book. It's a reprint in this book. It's not actually a new story. And I'm not going to criticize the book for that. I think reprinting those Free Comic Book Day books is needed so that if you want a physical copy of these books, your only option isn't buying basically an old Free Comic Book Day book, which can be awkward and you have to go to eBay typically to get it, and that can be a bit messy. So I do like that they do reprint Free Comic Book Day stories in these short story collections. I think that's good. And in this case, at the very least, they were relatively clear about that. Like the preview pages for this book were preview pages from all 3 free comics that they were going to reprint in here. And that's the thing, is like this one, for instance, is probably the best, if not one of the top 2 or 3 stories in the book. It's an unfortunate thing where I think 2 of the best in the entire book are reprint books, and a lot of the newer ones are the weaker stories. But you can see with this one, this is the Korra and Naga origin story book. It's 10 pages. It is a Free Comic Book Day book, and the main thing to say about this one is just it's the perfect example of using the page count for a short story really well to sell something important that people care about. Flashback people always like as well, and this is a notable one, how Korra meets her animal companion here in Naga, and having it be a very young Korra is pretty good. And obviously this is kind of pre-Avatar compound basically, so is some nice stuff in this, especially that last page montage as you go through the years with Korra and Naga as they kind of grow up together. That's a very nice kind of page in the book. Just that one there as you go through the kind of eras of her life, and you can sort of slot it in where like it's roughly like here is where like the Weaver's Ball era Korra from one of the later stories. It's kind of nice to see. And it's just that sort of stuff where for some of these stories I wish they do something along the lines of that final page a little bit more often. It's kind of like interesting that they got the short story format right with the first one, and they've been a little up and down since in terms of quality of story. Obviously you can't do your animal companion story every single time, but it was interesting that they got it right the first time. And it's just, I think, one of the most memorable short stories for all fans, basically. And just, to me, basically, like kind of everything works with this one pretty much. It even has like a little bit of like an emotional kind of core to it, because it is a young Korra dealing with the sort of like the training and still feeling even at this young age like she's kind of being held back a little bit, and her wanting to learn the other elements before she's kind of just about ready. That is kind of nice, which makes it all the more kind of weird that they decide to do almost like a sequel story to this in Weaver's Ball to cover similar dynamics just a few years on. And I don't dislike Weaver's Ball, but I think this is the superior story compared to Weaver's Ball. And it makes for, like, of 8 stories, 2 of them are set within a few years of each other about Korra and her training. And especially when, like, you also have 2 Milo stories, which we'll get to. It means like half your stories are covered like just with like 2 general ideas type stuff. They need a short story strictly focusing on Asami. Asami definitely needs more focus. She got a little bit here, as we'll get to. So the next story here is Skyscrapers. As you can see here, 4 pages long, this one. And it's basically young Asami and Yasuko discuss skyscrapers, and this inspires Asami's interest in architecture. It's a weird one, because when I read this for the first time, I was like, cool, Yasuko, why are we going in depth on how skyscrapers are made? And look, you can analyze it, like you go through it, and it is interesting to a certain degree what is discussed here, in that they bring up, you know, the idea that benders are needed for these parts, non-benders are needed for these parts. And it's, I suppose, meant to highlight that there was no anti-bender stuff in the family before the death of Yasuko, basically. Especially because, like, Hiroshi isn't in this story. None of that was there on, like, the Yasuko side of things, and none of it was there from, like, Asami when she was growing up. Other than that, it's just the sort of, like, you know, Yasuko sort of inspires Asami to get involved in more of that sort of architecture, you know, creative kind of fields and stuff like that. But it's absolutely the story that needs more pages. Like, why is this effectively our introduction to Yasuko in a story that is nice, but does feel like it just sort of like ends a little bit in mid-air, and it's just sort of cute is sort of like the best way to describe the story. It characterizes Yasuko like relatively well in just 4 pages, but definitely, given that we're going to talk about a couple of stories here that are like 8 pages long, 10 pages long, some of them are 12 pages long, why is this like the second shortest story in the entire book? That's what's really difficult to understand, especially when we know that, like I said earlier, this one was completely rewritten from what the writer initially planned. And she said it was meant to be, like, initially it was a darker story that basically got, like, vetoed by Dark Horse. I'm guessing she was told, like, write a Yasuko story, and potentially she went straight for the death of Yasuko's story, which is probably the one most people would want. I get to a certain degree why you maybe don't want to just have that randomly be a short story in the middle of a collection, like something super, super important like that, showing the death of a character, when they typically more, I think, focus these short story collections as being more of their, like, for the kids kind of style books, which is why they're never super important necessarily. So there's that. Question in chat: how long was Lost Adventures? If I remember correctly, it's like 214 pages or something like that. But most of it is collecting stories from the old Nickelodeon comic. I think only one, maybe two of them are actually sort of new or relatively new for the book. And even then, like, I'm pretty sure all of them came from somewhere else before that book. Something like that. But either way, it's like 3 times longer than any of the other short story collections. So there is that. So there's that. So yeah, that says Skyscrapers. Like, I wish there was a little bit more to say. Like, I feel like I'm moving on from it already, but there's only so much you can say. Like, it was nice to see Yasuko for the first time. Like, her relationship with her daughter Asami is cute. But that's all there really is to say, because it is just kind of 4 pages, and it's just a little bit of a kind of mother-daughter kind of fun time teaching, highlighting that Yasuko always had time for Asami. It wasn't a case where they were super busy all the time with the company. And then a little bit of the kind of Hiroshi Asami dynamic from, say, book 1 feels like that more came into their relationship after the death of Yasuko. I wouldn't read too much into the fact that, like, Hiroshi isn't in this book necessarily, but, you know, that's something by itself that's a little bit interesting. Then we go to Wisdom. So Wisdom is the 2-page Guru Lahima story, which, straight away, look, I think it's cool that they actually gave us a bit of a Guru Lahima story and went back, like, thousands of years ago to the time of Guru Lahima. But it's a 2-page story that is about probably the weakest, like, pearl of wisdom from Guru Lahima, and they're still very vague about it, ultimately, in that you only see him from behind, and he's just an airbender wearing airbender clothes. And I get it, it's meant to add to his legacy, but in a way, make this book have a big selling point by having it be the proper, like, debut of Lahima. Show him off properly. Like, show a scene of him talking to this airbender who comes up the mountains. The problem, I think, with it is that the whole Pearl of Wisdom is just, you know, what is wisdom? It's sort of like you could almost replace it with anything, you know. You know, what does it mean to be an airbender? It's just that whole thing of, like, almost being, like, needlessly obtuse about something. I get the idea of it, of just, like, don't seek out wisdom because wisdom is this kind of formless thing. So there's not too much to be gained by purposefully seeking out, just kind of let it happen, almost like the wind, it just kind of randomly happens. Something along those lines. But, like, it's fine. I get why they did it, because there is a 2-page Sokka poem in Team Avatar Tales, so they felt, I guess, that they wanted to do a 2-page story in this one. But this is where, like, I don't get page count assignment at all in this book. I really don't get the page count assignment whatsoever, because the problem with this book is that, like, it ends on, like, sort of like page 72, the final page of, like, comic content, and then it has a bit more, like, stuff with the extras and so on. But why couldn't they have just made it, like, 72 pages of actual content, like one of the, like, individual parts of a comic? That would have given us probably, like, 12 more pages that either could have been spread across the comics that we already have here, or been given to some of the other comics. It feels like, to a certain degree, like, is it really so unreasonable, say, like, the idea that when they're planning one of these short story collections, that they put, like, a poll out there for, like, fans to vote on about, like, what characters we'd like to see get some focus in these stories? Especially because they're, like, most of them are relatively low-key and not, like, unspeakably important, why not let fans kind of like vote on some of this stuff, just so we can get the character focus on characters that we actually want, um, rather than them just going up with these ideas. Because the part of the creative process that I still don't fully understand is necessarily like, who decided that these were the ideas for these stories? That's what they've never, I felt like, ever really explained effectively well, why this is the way it is. But yeah, cool. It'd be more interesting if it was longer, had much more to say. Not the best pearl of wisdom. That's all there really is to say about that one. So there's that. So I assume the Airbender Girl is the author of Poems of Lahima, which is the book in the Kyoshi books. Let me see. Well, what does it say here? So is written in the Poems of Lahima, and then at the start, doesn't it say that to seek the wisdom? Yeah, I guess that probably is the main kind of takeaway from the story, is that probably, yeah, this is the person who kind of wrote it down, because if this is one where she's the one who directly got it, I guess that would make her the author technically. I don't really know. Let's see. What is your theory about how all this fits within Avatar Studios' plan? This I don't think is necessarily part of the plan. I think they just came in. This happened to be one of the books that was being worked on while Avatar Studios formed. Some messiness happened. They helped at a certain point, decided on some of the stories, but I don't think necessarily the stories that we get here are any particular part of the plan. I think we're going to see the Avatar Studios plan for publishing when we get the Azula comic later in the year, and when we get the Mako comic on the Korra side of things. They will have to show us, hopefully, a new direction for the comics, because they are teasing that Azula comic as being like, hey, we're doing something different here. A really, really important story, advancing one-shot story for a character that you really care about. And then with Mako, he hasn't had focus in quite a while. Hopefully they do a similar thing on that side of things. But I don't really think we know. I still feel like there's a little bit of filling in the time until we get to probably second half of 2024, at which point we'll maybe get a sense for, are they going to do any publishing tie-ins that directly relate to the movies and stuff like that? We'll see how tied in all this stuff actually is, but it's hard to really figure out what's going on right now. So the next story in the book is Lost Pets, which in my mind is the weakest of the three reprint books in it. Because the big thing with this one is that it's 12 pages long. I almost forgot that this was the case. This is 12 pages long in the book, and it's tied for the highest amount of page count for a story. So it's one of the weaker stories, especially given as the longest story. So this one is basically Korra and Milo work together to find lost pets. Milo finds them being looked after by a man named Jobal, and he helps the man and the animals. And I think this is fine. It has a bit of an emotional core to it. Getting to see all the animals was kind of cool. It was nice to see kind of Korra know exactly how to sort of handle Milo throughout the book, to get him to actually do something. But it doesn't quite have the appeal of Friends for Life or the other one, which we'll get to, Clearing the Air. It doesn't quite have the appeal of them. It's not bad in that I think it is better than at least a couple of the newer stories. But again, it does stand out that I think the newer Milo story, I think, is better than this one. And I think it's more meaningful to the character of Milo, and that's why I think that one's kind of the better Milo story. The other thing that's a very weird connection between the two is that the other Milo story is called Cat Owl's Cradle, and one of the main animals that he goes after in Lost Pets is a cat owl. So, in the same way that there's the two young Korra stories, I find it so weird that we've ended up with two stories that are really, really similar to two of the older stories. Is it on purpose? That is such a weird coincidence that we end up with a lack of variety like that is kind of so similar in that sense. So yeah, this one is kind of nice, but there's not too much to really say about it. Yeah, and then of the Air kids, Iki definitely does get left out a little bit, because like Janora gets focus, Milo gets focus, but yeah, Iki gets a little bit left out. So okay, so some new people joining the chat here. Nice to see. I would like to have an Iki focused story just so all the Air kids get some focus instead of two Milo stories. Yeah, and that's where the whole like us not knowing how the planning on these stories really happens is so confusing. Like, did no one look at what was going to be in this book in the end and kind of think that like, hey, this isn't particularly great in terms of like character variety? I just don't get how that ended up like actually happening. And then we get to a change in the wind, and I've said it before, I said it in all my reviews and stuff like that. I think this is probably the best of the news stories in the book, because I feel it's just the strongest from like a character perspective. It has a weakness to it in that like it has like no plot necessarily, and it's just a story that basically takes place in a vacuum, because the story has no real interest in like telling you like why any of this is happening. Like literally when it starts off with somewhere in the Earth Kingdom, randomly the three of them are going in one of Asami's planes for some reason to do something, and then they literally land on a random plateau with a flat top right in the middle of the Earth Kingdom somewhere. Like it's weird, but then it's on the other side of things, the character writing is really, really strong for all three characters here. And it stands out compared to a lot of the books in that, like, okay, 8 pages. This one, I would have maybe liked it to be a little bit more. Maybe even if just that was to add just a little bit more depth to kind of the actual world building stuff. So the idea of this one, strong winds take down the plane Asami, Korra, and Janora are in, as well as disturbing some spirits. The plane is about to be destroyed by those spirits, and Janora is needed to calm the spirits, but can't because recent stresses in her life are impacting her spirituality. Asami and Korra help Janora through her struggles, and they move on. So in the sense that kind of plot sense, it is very much just a sort of like land on this random outcropping, issue happens, they leave. The plot isn't important, it's all about the character. And it's nice because Janora, I felt, was let down a little bit throughout, say, like book 4 by not really being included with like Team Avatar as like an extra member, and then them not focusing on her enough potentially like on her own. So seeing her like included a little bit more in like groups like this, and them seemingly like furthering the idea that like they're positioning her higher up in the new Air Nation, is good to see, even if it's just the sort of like background to this story that like she mentions going into this a little bit. Let me find it. The temple has more airbenders than ever before. I'm trying hard to help everyone, but it's never enough. Despite all my efforts, some of them still don't take me seriously. I know I should have more patience, but I don't. I just keep wondering why I'm trying so hard. I'm just so frustrated. It's nice to get this, because this is why the character writing is so strong here, because it's basically Janora encountering problems that the likes of Asami and Korra have sort of been through already as characters who are older than her, and it allows them as mentor figures to Janora to help her through those situations, which is nice to see, especially because, like, for instance, Janora is Korra's spirit guide. It is nice to get the kind of mentor relationship in reverse as well. So that's always good to see. I just finished The Rise of Kyoshi. Every time I finish a chapter in a book, I watch your video reviews. They help me with the novel. Planning to read The Shadow of Kyoshi really soon. Yeah, that is always great to see. Like that is a big part of why I do those chapter analysis videos, is because I know how much of a struggle for some people reading those novels can be. If you want to try and take in all the information, it kind of feels like I'm on to the next chapter, but I just forgot what happened in the previous chapter. What were the actual takeaways? And it is something like myself with books and stuff like that. I do wish there was like that content for like books that I read. So that's why I always make sure to do those for the novels, because it helps me to learn the book, breaking it down chapter by chapter like that. And it's always great to see the comments pop up every couple of weeks that like clearly this person is marathoning through that series of videos with them. So that's nice to see. But yeah, this comic here, Change in the Wind, really strong because like I said there, that's her talking about sort of the kind of logistics here. She's in like a leadership position within the New Air Nation, and she's struggling with like being a kind of leader for kind of one of the first times. So this is where Asami steps in as someone who has had to kind of step into a leadership position within her company and so on. She is the one to help Jinora through this kind of section of her struggles. And I like that, it's okay to feel frustrated, Jinora. You've got a lot on your shoulders. It's tough being in charge. I know how that is. And then this transitions into the more where Korra is going to come into play. But that's not like me. And now I can't even connect with the spirit world. That's always been such a big part of who I am. Without it, what am I kind of type thing. And this is the writing is so good here, is because that is exactly what Korra went through in like book 1 and at the end of like kind of like book 3 into book 4. It's that kind of like identity in your abilities, whether that be bending or in this case more of the spirituality thing. So having Korra there, who's literally experienced this like twice, is perfect to help Jinora through this as well. When I lost my collection to my past lives, I didn't feel like the Avatar at all. But listen, I know you'll figure this out. I found my way, and so will you. She's afraid to lose this part of herself, and they even like make the reference, and that's what's so strong here. That this is a relatively simple, just sort of like basically Korra and Asami reflecting on their experiences to help Jinora, but it is really, really strong because we've never had like a scene like this where you kind of get as strong of a bond for these three as you get here. And it's good as well because it is like Korra and Asami together helping Jinora as well, not just sort of like one or the other. It is both of them. And plus there's also like a cool factor of like Korra is doing this cool bending to keep the plane from like falling off, being taken away, and she just turns around while keeping it in place, and then there's a cool factor to that as well. And yeah, just like I'm still Korra, a Korra I know better now. You're figuring yourself out, Jinora. That's a strength, not a weakness. And then you get into the core Sami stuff. Like, you do get a little bit of that here. Like, I think the only way to really explain like this panel here is the idea of like Asami discovering that kind of relationship type thing, and that definitely fits a little bit in with like what they were going for in like kind of turf wars as well, and so on. So there's a little bit of core Asami right at the start, and then as you go into the kind of second bit as well, and then we of course finish it off with Jinora actually doing her skill, of course, which is obviously one of the technical points of like. She says she can't go into the spirit world. What she actually does is not technically going into the spirit world. It's just that terminology that they seem to get confused by when trying to describe the act of separating your spirit from your body, but your spirit is still in the physical world. It's a quite complicated thing to explain if you don't have it all in place in your mind. But it does seem like it's a big struggle for them. And at times it does feel like some of the comic writers get some of the spirit world kind of mechanics wrong, in that this feels a little bit like the whole Suki visited by the spirit of Kyoshi type thing, where it's kind of like, this is cool, but you're kind of like describing it wrong, or like that's not exactly how it works. because it makes for a cool like visual scene, seeing like Spirit Jinora doing all of this. But it's kind of like, why do you need to do it that way? Like, I get it's meant to be a visual signifier that, like, if Jinora can do this, this is her doing something inherently spiritual to connect with the spirits, when that's what she was dealing with. But technically, she could have just done that normally. Because I suppose we don't have too much of an example of, like, why your spirit being separated from your body, but in the physical world, changes that much of, like, what's going on here. And then you have the weird kind of thing of, like, are they just symbolically showing her doing some kind of movements, or is that like airbending, which wouldn't work if she's doing that? You know, it's just being a little bit nitpicky, but in a story that is really super strong in the character side of things, it's just a little let down on the technical side of things. And especially given that this was under Avatar Studios, you don't expect there to be errors like at all in anything whatsoever. Would you like to see if FCE writes a novel about Avatar Roku after the Yang Chen novel comes out? I kind of feel like Roku probably has to be next, because they either, I think, decide to go for Karuk again, but I think Karuk probably only needs one book if you're going to do it. And if not, you go for Roku. I think the problem with Roku is just based on, like, say, the Legends RPG information, is that I think most people would probably prefer the book to be focused on, like, Sozan's sister, Princess Zaysan, than directly focused on Roku himself. So you'd have to write a story that is, like, I suppose, still about Roku, but, like, Zaysan is doing stuff in the background. Unless you establish that those two knew each other, like, in some way that we just didn't really know. That said, they could keep the Zaysan stuff to the Legends RPG and, you know, just write a different Roku story because there is still a lot of room with him as a character to just do stuff outside of Sozan. Beyond that, the problem I suppose that they're maybe getting into is that they're getting into avatars that people don't know directly just from the show. You're getting into avatars that people will only know if they've read other novels, and will that sell necessarily? Like, if they do Avatar Zito next, is that name enough to make people get the book in the same way that a Kyoshi or a Yang Chen or a Karuk can sell books? And that's where you'd maybe be a little bit like, hardcore fans, yes, any Avatar is going to work, but it's a little bit unproven, in the same way that, like, if they just go for, like, a completely random Avatar we've never heard of, does that work? Most people, I think, would like to see them do that, but you wonder from that marketing perspective, would they do it? So that's the kind of the kind of like tricky thing when it comes to the novels, which is why I think Roku does make sense to do next, to just, like, do another, make the series long, covering the avatars that people know really, really well. Then you go back and tell other avatars after you're, like, super, super established. So there's that. I read an interview where he said he couldn't write those avatars that weren't in the show. I'll need to find it again. I'm wondering, though, with that interview, is that from, like, Kyoshi book era timeline, which is, like, pre-Avatar Studios, when they would have been more like, they would have been a little bit more, like, unwilling to tackle completely, like, new stuff, whereas with Avatar Studios, they would theoretically have the timeline to do it. Dawn of Yang Chen era interview. That's interesting. Maybe it's just FCE, because, like, I think, like a lot of people, we would expect other authors to eventually do novels, just so FCE is not just forever writing those novels. Sure, like, I'd like him to stick around for sort of as long as possible, but I think it's probably for the sake of the franchise going forward, it probably is a good idea to introduce sooner rather than later another author, so you can have, like, okay, FCE is the guy who does your um, avatars directly in front of Aang. That's his kind of like era that he's kind of like got the expertise at. Because I know he has said stuff like that before, like some of the weird comments he's made about like, hey, I don't want to do some of the stuff that's already been like covered in the show, and it's like, well, can you really call some of the Kyoshi stories like covered? Like the Chin the Conqueror incident is like a vague description of generally what happened without any real specifics gone into. Like you could absolutely write a novel about the Chin the Conqueror stuff, but he's kind of like, no, that's told already. Also, like if you read the breakdown stuff that he does on some of the kind of, I think it's in the Yang Chen exclusive edition chapter, um, when he like talks about kind of continuity, he does have a little bit of a weird take on sort of like continuity, when it comes to some of that stuff, where I think a lot of fans would be kind of like, yeah, you can do that, you can make that connection, you can do a little bit more than that. He's probably like a little bit kind of almost like overly cautious when it comes to that stuff. But yeah, there's the quote. I'm not sure that I have what it takes to write additional books about avatars beyond the ones Aang and Korra talk to. So, I don't know. That's probably just a case of like, maybe up to that point, he's only used to dealing with the avatars that have a sort of foundation and establishment in other content. Whereas with Avatar Studios more heavily in play now, they probably do have a better capacity to be like, here's the plan for this new avatar. You take it and run with it. Because like say even stuff like Avatar like Karuk, like he didn't have a lot of content to go off with him, but he did a good job at like just basically creating all of that. The same went for like Kyoshi as well, for the most part. Like she had a little bit more content, but the books focused completely on an era of Kyoshi that we knew nothing about whatsoever. But anyway, a little bit of a side discussion there on Kyoshi. So yeah, A Change in the Wind, really good overall. Next, Patterns in Time story is Weaver's Ball. So 8 pages, and this one is about Korra begins her firebending training, but wants to attend the Spirit Festival. She sneaks out to attend the festival, but causes an incident. Her father resolves things and then brings the festival to the compound. So the main takeaway here is basically, okay, cool reference, highlighting that here's her starting her firebending training. The series started with her moving on from her firebending training into her airbending training. That's kind of cool. But it's definitely, I think, the story that has the most amount of pages that probably has the least amount of like payoff ultimately, because the main takeaway you get from this is just a little bit more insight into what time in the compound was typically like. That it wasn't this thing where she just was never allowed out. It was strict, but she was allowed to go to this festival. They established that like most years she was allowed to go to this festival. And the only reason she can't in this book is because Master Yim is overly strict. And so that's kind of what happens here. Beyond that, it is just like she goes to the festival, randomly does some firebending and gets herself into some trouble, and then, like I say, Tonraq comes in, resolves it, and just brings the festival to her, highlighting that they're still protective and sort of won't give her like more freedom, but they will bring stuff to her so that she is sort of entertained, that she did have interaction with a lot of the other kids and stuff like that. It still meant that like she wasn't like the strongest like around other people by the time like the show starts, because it's more of these kind of like organized meetings rather than her constantly having like a friend by her side. So it still is a little bit of that, like when she meets her team in the show, they are like some of the really first, you know, true friends that she kind of like has. So I like that takeaway, but again, there's 2 Korra childhood stories in this one, and the other one, Friends for Life, is a lot better. And that, like, if this was a really long book that had like hundreds and hundreds of pages, this is a perfectly fine story. It just stands out as being a little bit weaker because it is so similar, and you kind of just wanted something a little bit different in the book. And this is the one where it feels like, yeah, I'd kind of swap this one out for another story if I was able to. There's the Zito reference, which is kind of cool, like the comics referencing Zito for the first time, because like obviously the name only really comes up in the novels, so it was cool to see a little bit of that kind of like cross-publishing kind of stuff kind of happening here. But yeah, the takeaway from this one isn't super strong, and I'd say it's like on the weaker side of like the artist as well. A lot of this stuff, I think, like, the artists are like quite good. This one, I feel like, fine, do another short story, but like, this is not necessarily an artist I'd want to be doing like the full series necessarily. So there's that. It's cool to like see Cora in her like fire bending kind of outfit, her initial one here. Getting Master Yim's name was kind of cool, but yeah, there's that. Not too much to say there. Clearing the Air as a reprint is a really, really good story. And I think this was such a surprise from the 2021 free comic. We didn't expect much from this because like the back of the book, like this is kind of like our preview for what this book was going to be. And I was really worried that even though it has Iki in it, I was worried it was just going to be the Air Kids arguing a lot. And it's just like Tenzin trying to resolve that. But the fact that it is actually more like that's just bookmarks on the story, the actual core of the story is a Tenzin flashback, is really strong. Like 10 pages feels like the sort of the right amount to tell a somewhat detailed story. So they give it enough time. The idea of this one, Tenzin damages property while chasing down teenagers who vandalized Air Temple Island. He's brought before Toph, but is saved by Aang arriving to resolve the situation. Aang brings Tenzin and the two boys to Air Temple Island to teach them to effectively resolve these issues. And so in the end, Tenzin actually becomes friends with these two boys, and along the way we get a little bit of an insight into sort of like Aang as a parent, Tenzin dealing with like the struggles of being like the second last airbender types thing, and the pressure he kind of feels and trying to live up to that. Very, very strong. And because it surprised us because it was one of the few insights into the Gap era. You almost didn't expect, like, are they allowed to do this? Are they allowed to set a story here? I thought only the show was allowed to do that. But it's really strong. Like, it obviously is a heavily referenced, it's a heavy reference to what Korra goes through when she arrives in Republic City, with the idea of, like, you know, Tenzin saving her from Lin, Aang saving Tenzin from Toph. All that stuff is very cool. And the dialogue is good as well. You actually get some in-depth character stuff from Tenzin when he talks to Aang as well, which is quite good. You can always tell, like, that there's a difference in kind of like almost class of the story when the writer can do a proper character moment like this, and when the stories don't have that. And this one has it. You know, A Change in the Wind had it with the characterization of Asami, Jinora, and Korra. They have it here. Let me get to it. Yeah, Tenzin's like, I can't believe you're just going to let them get away with everything. I know you're going to tell me this is why I haven't earned my arrows, because I'm not supposed to get angry or use my bending to attack, even when they deserve it. They deserved it, and I'm supposed to keep the Air Nation culture alive, but because of them, I couldn't even protect the airbending gates. And Aang says, Tenzin, the gates aren't important. You are. You could never let me down, just as you could never let the Air Nation down. We live on in you. I'm sorry that you have to bear the responsibility, but I trust you wholeheartedly with it. And so, if you're up for it, I'd like you to lead us in resolving this conflict traditionally. And it's just kind of showing that, like, hey, there's Aang being a good teacher. It's a direct counter to the people who have that weird idea that, like, Aang hyper pressured Tenzin to, like, be the next in line leader of the Air Nation. Here you clearly get the idea that he wants it, but struggles with, like, you know, these expectations which aren't necessarily even there. He kind of puts them on himself to be better, to be the leader of the Air Nation going forward. And you can see that Aang tries to keep the kind of pressure off in this situation, and in fact leads this into a situation of like teaching, and it's this amazing air nomad way of resolving this issue that nearly got them all thrown in prison, but they end up friends kind of coming out of it. So kind of cool, and you get that very kind of fun little kind of Katang moment up in the corner that's quite nice. And it highlights little things like that, where like Korrasami fans feel like they don't get a lot of Korrasami content, but like even Katang doesn't get that much content itself. And so, you know, this is like one of the more recent kind of examples of it, ultimately. So just overall, I think an effective story done really, really well. And again, a bit more of an insight into that gap, which is obviously where the movie is going to be set, obviously quite a few years, we guess, before this story. But, you know, it just highlights how little we've explored that gap overall. Definitely. So, yeah. The writer for this story is doing the next trilogy of one-shots. Kiku Hughes. Yes, that is correct. Yeah, Kiku Hughes is the writer for the upcoming Korra trilogy, one-shot trilogy. We still don't know exactly what it is. So, yeah, this is her writing, which is obviously very, very good here. And then, interestingly, the next story is done by the artist of at least the Mako book, but I think the whole trilogy going forward, Alexandria Monique. So this does give us a preview of our new creative team for the new Korra comics. And that's what really stands out from this story here, Cat-Owl's Cradle. This is probably like the surprise hit of this in a way. Yes, there's the frustration of it's another Milo story, when it could have been something else. It's 12 pages, as you can see there, so it is, again, on the longer end of stories. But it's actually reasonably well done. I think it does, in my mind, just enough characterization with Milo and Bumi, and addressing the whole like relationship with Aang as well. Aang being incorporated into this as well, to make it feel like important, and that it has like a notable emotional core to it. Yes, the plot isn't super strong in terms of like Wangmo Island and what's going on there, but the art is really, really strong. Like it's borderline like too good, to the point where it's kind of like, can you do this on that schedule that you're going to have to do like 3 comics in like a year and a half type thing? It's like, calm it down a little bit almost, because it's really, really, really nice looking. But the idea of this one is that a disappointed Milo goes to Bumi after finding out that Tenzin can't bring him on a planned trip. Bumi will go with Milo instead. They head for Wangmo Island, but encounter sky pirates as they arrive. After a confrontation, they land on the island and find the statue of Wangmo, highlighting that Aang came here to remind himself to never lose the fun and playful side of himself. And along the way, of course, Milo and Bumi have a little bit of bonding over the fact that they've both sort of been through this situation of dealing with like an important and busy father, and sort of Bumi helping the younger Milo through the situation, given that he's sort of explored it a little bit in book 2. Here he is helping Milo through it to kind of, in a way, prevent Milo from maybe developing some of those kind of more long-term kind of issues that Bumi and his siblings maybe had as you went into book 2, and just helping him through that at this kind of like earlier point. It's nice growth with Bumi to highlight like how far he's come with regards to how he views the situation. But it is a pretty nice story overall. There's a lot of nice art, and even some cool references and so on. Like the fact that like they take Lefty, Kai's bison, is actually quite cool. But that's just a nice little thing. And then, the Sky Pirates are sort of cool to a certain extent, but that's more just the kind of fun action set piece little bit on it. And yeah, Boom June is cool here because you get him and sort of like Pokey as well. So like they both have their own animal companions as well. That's nice. But I think it's definitely some of the more kind of like heartfelt moments. You know, did Aang ever bring you to visit here? He asks, and he says, no, I don't even think he brought Tenzin. This is where your grandfather came to meditate when he wasn't sure of the best way forward. Aang had so many responsibilities. It must have been hard for him, being the one person everyone looked to for help, the one person everyone expected to have the answers. When I was your age, I didn't get it. I just wanted to pal around with my dad, but he was always so busy. And that's nice. Like, that is the other perspective on Aang. And it's the one where a lot of the Aang is a bad parent people who really lean into that side of thing. It's the one perspective that they just seem like oblivious to, is that kind of aspect of the Aang situation as well. So I like that it actually brings up that kind of nuanced point here. And then we get into like, but I could help my dad. Since Tenzin isn't the Avatar, I could help. Then why doesn't he want to spend time with me? Why does something more important always come up? Maybe I'm just not good enough. He lets Jinora help him all the time. I keep thinking that maybe when I get my arrows. And Boomy actually steps in and is kind of like, no, you kind of can't think that way, because earning your arrows couldn't possibly make Tenzin love you more. You're good enough exactly as you are. They may be frustrating. They may not always have infinite time for us, but everything they do is to keep us safe. Milo's like, I just want Dad to be proud of me. I'm sure he is. And then I like that Milo kind of returns the favor and is kind of like, I'm proud of you too. And I heard Dad tell Mom that you're doing a good job learning airbending. For a feisty old goat dog, he said. So I like that there's that sense as well of just him kind of returning the favor of just like, I heard that Tenzin's also impressed with you as well. So, that they're both, helping each other in this situation. I actually like the use of the big Aang grin. That is sort of like the bane of a lot of like merchandise fans when it comes to like Aang. They seem to always like struggle to like either not do any grin at all or make it like way too big. I like the mention of the sort of trademark Aang grin that I suppose technically like there is a thing where like most of the other avatars we see kind of have a similar grin as well, but there's that as well. And then the takeaway from this is obviously that like the statue is of Wang Mo doing a weird face, and so he came to this island to just remind himself to always have kind of be playful and fun, which is a key part of the character of Aang. That's important, that it feels like it's all busy and stuff like that, but to keep him who he is, he needs to have that kind of side of things. So that's kind of cool. And then there is also like this, like I think people were super impressed by this just kind of almost like random full page image here of Korra by I think Michelle Wong. Really nice Korra. I wish they'd kind of like explain a little bit more about like, why is it here in a way, because it's cool. It's just like, okay, nice additional kind of like image in here. But that is the book. And then like I said, the problem with the book is just that like the character focus is quite skewed. And even when I put this up here, I think this is counting like one of these Korras is like counting her involvement in like the Lost Pets book, because she's in it at the start to a certain degree. You can almost take out the Lahima one because he's not really in it that much and so on. So this is even sort of like kind of stretching to give more character focus, but like the big thing is like going through all of those books, Mako and Bolin are just not in the book like at all, which is the really sort of like kind of crazy thing. And even if you include like Beach Wars, which also came out last year, he's not in that either. So Mako's not in it, but Bolin is. So that's if anyone asks, like, why is the first Korra comic Mako? Well, it's because he needs it the most of the group. Because at least Asami gets occasional focus, even if it's not ideal, because she's in the relationship with Korra, who's the main character. And she got, like, the young story here and was a focus in one of the books. Mako was just left out. Mako's not been in any of the Korra short stories. And you would say he hasn't been treated the best in his appearances in the, like, proper comics either. So that's why he needs that book. Asami probably does need the second one, and then we'll see what they do with the third one. Like, I suppose, like, that's one question. Like, we know it likely is a trilogy of one shots. What characters do you think they're going to do? So we know Mako. I think everyone is predicting Asami will get the second one, or at least one of the other two. But what will the third one be? Because I think most people lean towards Bolin, because Mako, Bolin, Asami would be a nice trio. But I almost feel with Bolin, like, he doesn't necessarily, like, need it too much, because he kind of has an arc that's ongoing in the main comics. And his stories often tend to go in a very specific direction. They could do something good with it, but I'd almost prefer it to maybe be Jinora or Iki or someone like that, if that's what they're going to do. Let's see, Jinora should get it. Kaya's an interesting one, for sure. You do wonder, like, do they plan them to be thematic? Because it was sort of themed, the first one-shot trilogy. Mako, Bolin, Asami makes sense, but I don't know, because, like, if they did say Mako, Asami, Kaya, it almost makes Kaya being the third one feel a little bit random. Lin actually would work. I think that's actually a decent suggestion, because she kind of hasn't really had a lot of focus in the comics much, so Lin could work, for sure. That could actually be a decent option, because through Lin you could do some stuff that maybe involves, like, Sue and the rest of the family there in Zaofu and the like, depending on what they want to do. That's nice as well. Kai or Opal, I'd actually like to see maybe get a bit of focus as well. I'd maybe like to see, like, a Kai focus where, like, Jinora is in it, but the focus is maybe more on Kai specifically. Because I'd maybe like a sense for, like, within the new Air Nation, like, who is kind of next in line to get tattoos. I'd actually really like to know what the kind of plan is next, because I'd lean towards probably, like, Opal and Kai, and then Boomy maybe eventually. But then, like, Milo, Iki, of course, have to be somewhere on the list. But I kind of do feel like Opal and Kai, they're definitely positioned in book 4 as, like, they're probably right up there next on the list in a way. And yeah, we need Kai and Jinora relationship stuff, because they just it felt like they forgot about it in book 4 to a certain degree. Watch it be Milo. There is potential with Milo as a character, but I think people would have a meltdown if Milo got one of the one-shot comics after getting 24 pages of content in this book. So there's that. Honestly want a comic story about Katara, Toph, and Zuko reuniting after the book 4 finale. Yeah, that sort of stuff would be kind of cool. Anything with, like, the older cast in a more kind of serious light post-series is always good. Especially Zuko, now that, like, he knows, like, what the situation is with, like, Iroh, could be interesting. So there's that. But yeah, that is most of what there is to say about Patterns in Time. It's like, it's a good book. Like, I don't think you can really say, like it's a terrible book or something like that. You can criticize a lot of the decision-making questions about, like, why is this only this amount of pages? Why does that character get that many stories? What were they doing with a lot of it in terms of, like, marketing and stuff like that? But fundamentally, I think it is an improvement over Team Avatar Tales, like, across the board. so it to me just ends up being very middle of the road. Like I think this is probably like either like a 6.5, or a 7 out of 10, depending on how positive you are about it. I think any score that's higher than that, I feel, is over the top. And then you're getting into too much negativity, I think, if you score it kind of like lower than that. Because, for instance, the Chibi comic is 10 times worse than anything in this. The Chibi comic is one of those ones where, like, reflecting on that, like, I think the score I submitted to Dark Horse was like 6, but I'd probably lean more towards maybe like a 5.5 at this point, maybe even 5, because I feel pretty strongly that like that the Chibi comic just misses the mark on everything it's trying to do, completely. Like it just feels like it doesn't have a place in the lineup of Dark Horse Avatar books. It just feels like some weird idea they randomly came up with, and I don't know what happened. Because this one must have been also planned before Avatar Studios. But I can't imagine Avatar Studios cares too much about this random chibi comic, so I just don't know what happened. Yeah, the problem also with this was that, like, this was originally meant to be sort of to celebrate the anniversary. And the problem with Korra last year was that they didn't do anything Korra related last year. Like, the free comic happened to have a Korra comic in it. This happened to come out next year. Otherwise, it was just reprint stuff. How does the review actually work? You mentioned the score you gave. Basically, just where I get the review copies from, Edelweiss. Basically, the idea is, like, to keep your reputation as a reviewer up, you're meant to, like, officially review and then submit your review to the publisher so that you actually, like, keep your account good, which is why they approve you for, like, future review copies. That's pretty much basically kind of like the idea there. So I do actually have to submit, like, a written review for it. I think I actually posted my written review on Tumblr for the Chibi comic, which obviously my spoiler review, when the book eventually finally comes out, will be more representative of, like, what's included in that. But that's just basically the idea. Like, there's a few categories you give it scores on, but generally there's, like, an overall score out of 10 you give it, as well as an actual written review. And I don't think it necessarily means anything. It's more of just a, you know, because you were given a review copy, it's in exchange for the review, which they can use for publicity reasons if they so wish. But I don't think anything I said about it would make it onto the cover necessarily. Not that I think they'd ever use my one anyway, but that's just what it is. Yeah, so that pretty much, I think, brings the Patterns in Time stuff to an end. It's just with Korra comics, like, the one-shots need to be really, really good. We need to get Korra comics back on track, because if we're not advancing the story because of whatever we're doing in the movies, they need to actually do something with the characters. Like, the Mako comic, like, I find it very hard to speculate what exactly they're going to do, because I don't really know where we're at with regards to, like, what they can or can't do in these stories. Like, the Mako story, I think most people think of is probably, like, some sort of a hunting down the person who killed his parents, and how does that work given that he's a police officer, but it might be emotional. Or do they just do more of a Katara, Toph, Suki type story with Mako, and it be not as crazy important as, like, the Azula comic looks like it's going to be. Honestly, because of, like, how I think kind of, like, poorly treated Mako has been, I wouldn't mind it just sort of being kind of like a day in the life of Mako as a police officer, and just, you know, him interacting with Lin, going out, hunting down some triads, and just interacting with, like, a character here and there, just to show that, like, this is what Mako's good at. Here he is doing his thing, and this is the position that he's in late book 4 after everything that's happened. Beyond that, like, I find it, like, kind of difficult to predict what they're going to do. Especially because like they need the comics to be important, because like we're going to get into Avatar Studios next. We're going to have to wait until late 2025 before any of this other content comes out. So we still have all of this year, all of 2024, and most of 2025. So we still have the core of like 3 years to fill in with basically publishing. And because like Dark Horse have been so weak for the last 2 years, like Patterns in Time is the only book basically for Korra in the last 2 years. And it's becoming quite a long time ago that Imbalance came out, that Runes of the Empire came out. That's the big problem that we're kind of encountering. Because I think I said this in one of my videos somewhat recently. It might have been one of the end of year videos. The big failure of 2022 in publishing is that you look at 2019, so pre-Avatar Studios, like well pre-Avatar Studios. The lineup of stuff we got from publishing in 2019 was really good, and we've not seen the likes of it since. We got Imbalance Part 2, Imbalance Part 3, Runes of the Empire Part 1, Runes of the Empire Part 2, Team Avatar Tales, and the first Kyoshi novel. This year we got Patterns in Time and Yang Chen Book 1. Now we also got the Legends RPG, which is something different, but it highlights like in just like 2-3 years, Dark Horse have gone from being able to release 5 books in a year to struggling to get one out. All because apparently Avatar Studios has happened. The thing that is meant to make Avatar run smoother, better, give us more connected material has so far resulted in less content. That's the frustration and why like this year needs to be an improvement. So that's the big kind of frustration, is that in that 2020, the reason like the likes of say 2020, 2021 were so disappointing is because before Avatar Studios, Dark Horse clearly had a plan to release quite a bit of interesting content, in that there was a core comic trilogy planned for 2020 that felt like it was on the verge of being announced, like right as Avatar Studios I think was building up. That just went from being on the verge of being announced to not being talked about at all, and has clearly been silently cancelled in the background because of Avatar Studios. The same thing seems to be the case with Beasts of the Four Nations, where it was part of the deluxe series of books planned before Avatar Studios. Avatar Studios has come in and apparently put that on hold in some way. I don't really know the situation because we're waiting for any information to see what's happened with that book. But the net result on publishing is that Avatar Studios seems to have pushed it back by like what feels like a year and a half. And that's why it's been rough for like quite a couple of months, and why we are hoping the second half of this year, with hopefully Azula comic and the Mako comic, gets it back on track. If they do comics for new avatars. Yeah, like that is the interesting thing, is that like with Avatar Studios, Dark Horse theoretically should be able to get away from being locked into, they only do literally ATLA comics and Legend of Korra comics. Like, can they do a Kyoshi comic if they want to, or is that at all allowed, or is that Abrams are Abrams the Kyoshi people? That's the kind of like important thing. Like obviously Kyoshi can make a random appearance in like say Suki alone, but can they tell a story in the Kyoshi era if they want to? Now, especially that Avatar Studios is in place to keep track of things much better, they should be able to do that, and so they should be able to go a little bit Chronicles of the Avatar if they want to, rather than just everything is ATLA and Korra. Now, will they do that, or are they fine sticking to just the 2 avatars that we know? Who knows? Mako and Fire Nation politics and the Fire Nation. Yeah, because that's the other thing with the Korra comics. It felt like we were going to the Fire Nation at some point, and now it feels like are we going to the Fire Nation? Who knows when? I don't really know. Will that be potentially what the first Korra animated project is? Who knows? We'll have to get to it. But let's switch over to Avatar Studios Rumours. And also to switch this. There we go. So, Avatar Studios Rumours. And that's, I think, the way you sort of have to frame a lot of this, is that we have a tiny amount of official information on Avatar Studios. Everything else is insider information that is very believable and from sources that I think we can trust, but has to be treated with a little bit of a grain of salt until it actually gets officially confirmed. Because there's a big gap between what we know officially versus what is being said by Avatar News, and now I think we're getting a couple more leaks, and I get the impression that probably by the end of the year there'll be quite a few different people posting like leaked information as production finally really kicks into gear on these projects, and there actually is just more to talk about in general. So the big rumor about the sort of structure of Avatar Studios is that the plan is for a movie and a show to release in each of the first 3 years of Avatar Studios. So, to put that another way, 6 animated projects in the first 3 years of Avatar Studios. 6 projects in 3 years. Unheard of for Avatar, because we're so used to only like rarely, once an era basically, getting one of these animated shows. And I've seen a lot of pushback on this. A lot of people just being unable to believe that this is what's happening. But in my mind, everything that's been said officially about Avatar Studios absolutely points in the direction of they are not just planning Avatar Studios to be one project at a time. Everything they've said officially from start to finish has always been multiple projects, multiple types of projects, and absolutely that once they get going, it is going to be a somewhat consistent string of shows that aren't separated by too much of a gap. Now, I'll bring in some of this stuff as I go down here, because I actually got some of the quotes. So, yeah, the first thing here is this. Paramount literally confirmed Avatar Studios is going to be doing new series, short-form content, spin-offs, and theatrical films. So officially, all that's actually been confirmed is 3 movies, one of which we know about and has a date. But they officially said they would do these other types of materials, which is why the relatively recent news of like what seems to be the first series show makes a lot of sense. Because I was wondering, like, why are we so movie focused when, you know, especially for like making stuff for a digital platform, it makes a lot more sense to have a series than be all movies. So this makes complete sense that they're going to do movies to go for the theatrical stuff, but also have a series where Paramount Plus is the only place you can watch it. That, like, it's going to be weird if they just do 3 movies in a row with no series anywhere in that gap. And it all goes back to like some of the earliest information. This is from like the week Avatar Studios was announced. Then from some of the like interview style stuff, you can see here, they want to develop our franchise and storytelling on a vast scale in myriad exciting ways and mediums. And there are still many stories and time periods that we're eager to bring to life. We have, with this new Avatar Studios venture, we have an unparalleled opportunity to develop our franchise and its storytelling on a vast scale in myriad exciting ways and mediums. We are grateful to Nickelodeon for their enthusiasm for this, and they've supported our ambitious plans and created a positive environment for us. In the biggest way possible, they're going to build great teams, plural, productions, plural, to make all of this a reality. And then this is from like 2 weeks ago or something like that on the Braving the Elements podcast. This is what Brian said. That the one thing he mentioned about Avatar Studios was like, they said, you will need to be patient for a while. This stuff is going to take a long time to make. But then, one day there will be so much stuff. And the only way I think you can read that is that when they finally get going, it won't be that much long after the first project that the second project is immediately getting going. Because they don't want to have 2 years. Like, can you imagine that's actually the way it works? First movie comes out. You have to wait like 1.5 years, 2 years for the next movie. It's quicker than we're used to. But given what they've talked about, that's a relatively slow pace and a slow schedule. But you can see the way they're talking about it, which is why this schedule here does actually make sense. They can do this. Right now we know they have one animation studio on board, Flying Bark. That's going to be the animation studio for the first officially confirmed movie, the Aang and Friends movie. So that's potentially your movie studio, which probably will be doing this project, and maybe this project. And that is possible to do. Animation studios can do that, especially if they are staffing up for this. They already have like a studio that is capable of doing a big animated movie, but they're getting more people on board because they're doing multiple projects in a row. If they just get one more animation studio on board, they have a studio to then do a show. And again, we're still talking about like this is 3 years away from now, basically. And look at the schedule for, say like Korra, for instance. The only giant gap in production for Korra was between book 1 and book 2. And that was a lot of that was because of not being confirmed for everything. Whereas the whole point of Avatar Studios is that they are basically confirmed for everything already. So if they plan 3 seasons of a show, they know going in they are planned for 3 seasons. And so if you go with the book 2 to 3 into 4 gap, we got book 2, 3, 4 back to back across like 2013 and 2014. And especially between book 3 and 4, there was really not much of a gap at all. So if they're doing 12, 13 episode seasons, you can absolutely understand how, for instance, say this and this, say this is season 2 of the Earth Avatar show, how that's absolutely possible, especially if in 2026, this apparently non-mainline show is the show that we're getting. Potentially one of these spin-offs that they're talking about. Maybe it's a mini-series that's only like 6 episodes. Maybe that one's done by another animation studio or something like that. Maybe this is your short-form content and stuff like that. Is really, really interesting to just see kind of like how they make that work. Because that's obviously the schedule that we seem to have, with the idea being that 3 movies are fully confirmed. So that actually matches up somewhat well with like, okay, they're going to want to release them somewhat close together. Only the first has officially known details. According to Avatar News, the shows for 25 and 26 are different. So this one is not just season 2 of this one. But we don't know how shows having multiple seasons will work with this schedule. So like I think Avatar News says, it's unclear if 2026 also has, like, say, season 2 of this. If 2027 has season 2 of this and season 3 of this as well. Or if it's just 1 and 1 each time as well. And again, that's where the whole idea of, they talked about 4 types of projects. So far, we only seem to know about 2 if you factor in all the rumors, which is series and movies, but potentially not mainline show. That reads like spin-off to me. That reads as if that potentially is a show that either is not focused on an avatar or is just sort of like the greatest hits of a specific avatar's life type thing, rather than being like the full journey of that avatar necessarily. So there's that. Then also, we seem to basically know that there are all these other projects in development as well. There is a Zuko-focused movie. So basically, ATLA Movie 2 also seems to be a thing that is happening. that I think Avatar news is kind of like feels is probably the second movie, but is not quite ready to fully say that that is exactly the case. Kyoshi movie seems to be a thing that will happen eventually. It potentially was initially in this initial lineup, but has maybe been just like bumped out a little bit. So yeah, like I think was mentioned in chat there. Yeah, the stuff that is planned, I think, beyond the first 3 years of Avatar Studios definitely will hinge on this stuff doing really, really well. So you kind of, have to support this stuff to get to the later stuff. But, we'll have to wait and see how that all works. And then, yeah, like, even though I don't think there's a lot of official information about a Korra movie or project, it seems like one was either there on the schedule at some point or is in the planning somewhere along the line. Plus, Avatar News basically says he knows what the other kind of stuff is. He basically, right now, seems to know what these are. He just does not have permission, apparently, to actually say what they are. So, take from that what you will. I'm not sure what to make of that necessarily. And then obviously there's going to be way more projects as well, because like I said, short form content, potentially like digital content that maybe is more like YouTube based or stuff like that. Where does that go? What's going to happen there? Because look, I think we're getting Korra and stuff like that. We're going to get Korra for sure. I think we're going to get a Kyoshi project, definitely. I think it makes sense to do a second Avatar movie because I think they probably have one key final main story that they maybe want to tell across, say, 2 movies, 3 movies, or something like that. That's something that is quite interesting. There's no way Flying Bark is doing all 3 movies in 3 consecutive years. Well, this is the thing. Like, we don't really know a lot about behind the scenes at Avatar Studios, because if they're developing a specific animation style that seems to be in an attempt to create consistency and also efficiency, it's possible because other studios have done stuff like this. Like, say, like Sword Art Online, the same animation studio put out a movie last year, and they put out one... What? I'm getting confused now because we're right at the start of this year. So 2021, there was a Sword Art Online movie. There's also a Sword Art Online movie in 2022. That's coming out in English in the next coming months. That was basically only a year between releases. You can do it because, I think a lot of people look at sort of like movie quality animation and assume it has to take like five years or something like that. When if they get the style like down and have this plan to do it, it's theoretically possible for that to be the case. Now, we don't know that is the case. It could be a situation where by the end of the year we maybe know that Avatar Studios is using, like, say, 3-4 different animation studios. I'm just kind of making the point here that animation studios, it pretty much all depends on, like, yes, time that you give them, but also sort of like, money, budget, the people that are also on board, and stuff like that. Like, it is an idea that can work, in that these rumors are pretty strong about this being the lineup, and like I touched on, their plan is ambitious, and this is what they want to do. I think that I think they can make this work, because like I said, like, look at the gap between Korra Book 3 and Korra Book 4. When you get properly into a production, like, you can, stuff can happen quicker than you perhaps kind of think. It's kind of when there's hiccups in the production and stuff not getting confirmed, which doesn't seem to be a roadblock for the Avatar Studios projects, like it was with early Korra and stuff like that. We'll see. So the talking more specifically about the projects, like, it's one of those ones where, like, the speculation we all had about the very logical ATLA movie that they're going to do from when Avatar Studios was first announced is still completely valid right now when we know basically nothing about it. So I find it kind of difficult to speculate about what the Aang and Friends movie is going to be, especially if there potentially is a follow-up in the Zuko focus movie, which I don't know if they're going to do a thing where maybe like they're set up in that first movie for the second movie to be this Zuko more focused one, or if they're just going to be separated projects completely. I'm actually really interested to see what they do with that, because my guess is that this probably has to be your more proto-Republic City, the gang all as, 20, 21-year-olds type thing, very much kind of young adults, but in these important positions as you really see Cranefish evolve into actually being Republic City proper. The question is like, is that a strong enough plot for the opening movie of Avatar Studios? I think like it's going to work kind of no matter what, just because it's the ATLA movie and people are going to go see it out of nostalgia, just wanting to see the characters older, which has been a demand from the fandom for years. Like people complain that Korra doesn't get content, but like we also haven't really not seen a lot of the gang as adults, which is why basically every news post about this movie includes that old Friends poster. So we need to get some official stuff on this like soon, in my mind. Beyond that, like I'm just kind of like, is that what they do with this movie? Do they make this more of a sort of nostalgia, fan servicey like movie, or do they actually try to develop like a really in-depth plot with character arcs for all the characters? Or is what we're trying to do here actually just be like, here is the characters that you know, older, basically in their primes, and here's sort of like, in a way, like a basic threat that they just get to show how skilled they are as they solve, as they go through it. Which is sort of like your kind of almost like typical like anime kind of movie style thing, where it's the plot isn't like crazy important, but it allows for just a really cool showcase of characters. And I'm wondering what they want to do. I struggle with the idea that Mike and Brian would go for just that sort of flashy movie just for the sake of it. That they would want to do something more, in my mind. But what exactly is it? Because the gap between Avatar and Korra has been so focused on Republic City that I'm almost like I almost feel like with Imbalance, have you not already covered a lot of the ideas? That Imbalance has covered the early section, Korra covers where we get to. Is it that interesting to just cover the middle ground of Republic City? I think so, to a certain degree, if it's like very early Republic City and you have people like moving in for the first time from some of the other nations. But do you want it to be that kind of political in a way? And then what do you necessarily do that is not just the sort of like Li Ling kind of version 2 kind of enemy? What do you actually make the threat of this movie? Who is the villain? And that's where I kind of wonder, like, will they make this a kind of part 1, part 2 thing with Azula as the villain, where the first movie, things are going good, you get a little bit of your kind of fan service stuff at the start, but then boom, Azula makes her move, adult Azula makes her move, and it's sort of like, it ends on a kind of crazy kind of note. And then the Zuko movie is obviously where they maybe do the more character stuff with Azula, and that's where you get like her kind of redemption type thing and stuff like that. Avatar News AMA on Avatar subreddit. He said Paramount will focus on ATLA era first to ride the popularity. That just seems like very logical and like it makes complete sense from a business point of view. That I think most people would probably say that's probably the way they'll do it. The reason Avatar is up first is because it's the most popular thing in the franchise, and it makes complete sense to start off like that. So I don't know how much insider information there necessarily is there, but it's nice to know. Is Yukon going to make a cameo? Is this core movie? Yeah, like that. That's the other thing. I don't actually have that down anywhere here. Is that it does look like in general across the board when it comes to especially Avatar and Korra projects, they are going to be recasting pretty much all of the voice actors, by the looks of things. Right now, we seem to only have official rumored information that suggests that Dante Bosco will keep the role of Zuko, but that basically all the other main ATLA characters will be recast, and then Janet Varney at some convention at some point in the last few years did say that she's basically going to give up the role and effectively wants Korra recast herself. My own thoughts on this are that look, certain recastings are going to need to happen, like regardless of in a way what fans want, would like, what would be potentially best. Like Aang is going to be recast. There's just no kind of if, ands, or buts about it. Aang will have to be recast because Zach Carter-Eisen is not a voice actor anymore and has not voice acted since 2008, basically. So in that case, you have to do the recasting. And potentially for some of the other characters, if you're going for kind of young adult, like if let's assume it's maybe like 21 or if it's maybe like 25, I can understand how maybe you might feel like, okay, they want to go maybe slightly deeper with Sokka, so they might need to move away from Jack Desena for Sokka. But I think for maybe the likes of, say, like Azula and Katara, where you'd be pretty confident of their voice actors being able to do slight adjustments if required for the character at that age, I don't feel the need that you need to change it unless you like have to change it, would be kind of like my idea. I think that would also help to ease like the fandom into the idea that like you will be making a lot of changes. It's just that you have some of that original cast, because like I think just Dante Bosco alone, if he ends up being like the only voice actor from like the original two shows that ends up kind of coming back, that will be a bit of a weird look for the show. Like you get why they're doing it, in that they're making an effort to be more accurately diverse to what the nations of Avatar are actually like based on in real life, and that obviously makes sense. But again, it's like because there are so many projects in the planning, like specifically say the Earth Avatar after Korra, like theoretically, like Janet Varney would be the only like legacy voice actor you would have in that show. Every other character would have to be recast because they're or you can do your diverse casting with, because everyone's going to be either a new character or it'll be Korra characters that are so old you would have to do a recast. That's kind of my thoughts on it, are that like I'm accepting that recasting will have to happen, but I think you should give at least some of the original actors like a chance to keep their roles. At least that's kind of like my thoughts on it. I just worry with the fandom at times that like if you just by default like change everything all at once, you're kind of almost inviting a bit of a backlash. Whereas if you kind of do a bit of a mix, people will be a bit more okay with it. But we have to wait and see what happens. It's still super early. Like I think just about barely know the whole Dante Bosco information and stuff like that. We'll see what happens there for sure. But I feel you can keep some legacy voice actors, given that there's going to be a relatively limited amount of projects where you will even have those voice actors in it, and most of your projects going forward, you can just like have completely new people doing new characters for different series, is kind of my approach. But yeah, there's all that sort of stuff. Yeah, because like this is the thing where, like, you know, so some of these voice actors do feel like, you know, they're attached to that character. Like for the fans, like they are that character, and it kind of feels a bit weird to almost have this like approach that borderline like almost pressures them into feeling like they have to give up their role, which I don't really like that idea. But you know, again, we don't know what the full like intent or approach is right now. The headlines kind of read a little badly that just like one returning actor and no one else is coming back, when we don't really know what the full situation is. But anyway, there's that. So yeah, I think it's kind of difficult, like even in the chat there, like I think most people are finding it hard to kind of predict what the plot of this first movie is going to be. Like it makes so much sense that they do an ATLA movie, but the details are very difficult to predict. Ultimately, like I find it very hard to come up with any ideas that like are, you know, the depth of story that you would expect from Avatar in a full movie, for sure. But like I said, I think maybe committing to like Azula, like, you know, the first movie is probably like potentially like the last movie where Azula is just a full on villain. And then the Zuko movie can be more focused on Azula character development, something like that. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, and that they use upcoming comics to position Azula away from, say, like the where she is at the end of Smoke and Shadow, into more of where they'll need the character ahead of her movie appearances potentially. That's the only thing I can think of, just because Azula is the most notable character who has an unknown character arc of like the main cast, and that there's big potential to do something big with one of the characters through that character arc, but we don't know. So there's that. And because Azula wasn't mentioned in Korra, it is one of the few kind of ways where you can do something that kind of in a way isn't spoiled already by Korra, as kind of has been mentioned in chat kind of there, that it has to be something that's not game-changing enough that it would be odd to have never been mentioned as like having happened in between the series. Like if some kind of crazy incident happens, like why wasn't it mentioned at all? The timeline, how old they are in Korra. Is Katara going to be revealed to be pregnant with Boomy? I forget the way the details on this work, but I'm pretty sure the way it works out is that I don't think Katara has Boomy until she's like, is it late 20s or like early 30s? Like they don't have kids like anywhere kind of near like young, I think, based on the way the ages work. I think it's hard to predict because I don't think we know exactly what age Boomy is. We just have like a guess off the kind of family photo, what exactly way it works. But definitely I think if it's, I think it's all but confirmed that like it's young adult in the movie. The expectations, I think, would be that no one has kids yet. Like I think that's the way it pretty much like has to work. Yeah, I don't think anyone would have their kids yet based on the timeline, unless like they're stretching young adult to be like kind of late 20s, stuff like that. But I am thinking it's going to be more like 20 or something like that. But yeah, what way can you figure it out? I'm trying to think of this. What way does this work? Okay, so Aang was 66 when he died. Korra 17 at the start of the series, and Boomy, Tenzin is, I think, exactly 50 at the start of the series. So you go back and you can kind of calculate it from there. Um, how I'm trying to do the maths off the top of my head. How does that work? So Tenzin was 33 when Aang died, meaning Tenzin was. So yeah, they had. I mean, Aang was 33, I guess, when they had Tenzin, meaning Katara was 35. So I think Katara would need to be, I think, what, based on estimating for Bumi, like, it'd be like mid-20s, I think, for Katara having Bumi. So like 25 is probably the like earliest, which is possible to be young YA still. But it depends on what your estimates are for like Bumi's age. If there's a much bigger age difference, like it is potentially possible that like we have a young Bumi in the show, but we're not super sure on that. Again, because they didn't give us ages for specific characters, it's kind of very difficult. But yeah, there's that. So yeah, there's that. Then there's this. This was like the big Avatar news from the end of the year. There's obviously the scheduling thing, but the big one was obviously show is going to be about the Earth Avatar after Korra, and it will be 2025 potentially. I'm slightly skeptical that they get a show out the same year, but we'll see what exactly happens. I think this makes sense. This feels like a Mike and Brian move that I wouldn't have predicted it to be like one of the first two projects, but somewhere eventually I absolutely think they were going to get to doing the Avatar after Korra. Regardless of how weird the technology or the future direction of Avatar is going to be, they were going to tackle that at some point. That's just like what Mike and Brian like and want to do. I think for kind of showing the scope of Avatar Studios, this 2025 lineup is actually somewhat interesting, that they're going for basically continuation of the like oldest Avatar content, the original content of ATLA. So giving fans exactly what they want, but also kind of like in a way like challenging fans with, we're going even further. We know a lot of you are a bit concerned about going forward, but we're going for it anyway. And just that confirmation in everything they've talked about, that they're still going to tackle all of the other eras in other projects, which is why I'm not overly concerned about this, is because sure, we will get this, but it's coming potentially in the same year as we get the movie we've always wanted, and there's all these other projects potentially on the horizon that are, once we get to this content, only like a year or two away. Which, given that we're going to have to wait like 3 years to get to them, that's going to be much more kind of like reasonable, because we're going to be constantly in the like hype build-up kind of release cycle for an animation project, pretty much, if that is the way that the schedule is going to work. So that's going to be a kind of crazy kind of time period to think about. But Earth Avatar after Korra. Now, we'll bring in the other piece of rumored information. Like, apparently this account is a known account for stuff like this. So it's not just, I don't think, a random person just saying this out of the blue. I find it obviously like it's a little bit more like, it feels a little bit more sketchy than like Avatar news, but it's something to go off because it got quite a bit of traction. The next sequel show will have more of a cyberpunk setting and will have multiple energy benders and flying airbenders, so expect more Dragon Ball Z level fighting. I'd almost like ignore the Dragon Ball Z comment, and I think that the actual scoop is probably just that next Avatar will be cyberpunk setting, because I think he's just saying flying airbenders, multiple characters, therefore more fighting in the sky, which is Dragon Ball Z. I think that's the only real Dragon Ball connection that's being made here. Um, for anyone wondering about that. Multiple energy benders is probably the weirdest part of this, but it doesn't immediately make me go like, nope, no, like that's a crazy thing to happen, because there is so much about what energy bending is that we just like don't in any way know. It's weird to think about, but I think this does make sense. I think with the way advancement of technology has gone in Avatar, cyberpunk, potentially 100 years into the future, seems potentially like the way that they would actually go. So that is quite interesting, if that is the path, which I think makes sense, because if you're getting to the point where you already have like mech suits by the most advanced countries, 100 years on, like you can see the idea where like, yeah, you would have kind of stuff like that and it be actually kind of quite heavily advanced. I think that the thing with energy benders is that I think there's probably still a ton to reveal about it in terms of like what that exactly means. But the possibility of there being multiple energy benders is possible, because we know line turtles can give energy bending. And we know at the very least there's one line turtle left, but we don't actually know what the situation is with the other ones. So there could be some sort of a weird thing where like maybe the line turtles returned, gave energy bending to more people. And then energy bending is always weird in terms of like, it feels like you get specific energy bending skills, but like the line turtles are the only like full energy benders. So that's another thing that's kind of like hard to really speculate about what exactly that means. But it's very interesting that if we're going to a cyberpunk setting, this is the era where we have the most energy benders we've ever had. That seems like, again, that kind of technology spirit contrast a little bit, in terms of like what exactly we're going to do there. I'm wondering what that means for like how technological we're talking. Are we getting into like robots? Because again, early concept art, like super early concept art for Avatar had basically like Aang with like a robot monkey kind of Momo thing. So is that what we're kind of trying to get into? The idea that like, you know, we have sort of like energy within like robots, and we have kind of like living technological things, or what are we doing here? I don't really know. It's hard to speculate about. Flying airbenders, I think the only way to interpret that is that either the cloud surfing technique has returned from the past, or the Zahir, you know, lose all attachments, actual airbender flight technique has become more prevalent across the world. Now, what does that say about the way that technique gets unlocked? Have people found a new philosophy where it's maybe not as extreme, like losing all attachments? Is that kind of part of the era that no one is attached to things or something like that? That could be an interesting kind of way to go with things. But it is interesting in terms of like, I wonder like, how does these specific little bits of details actually come out about this? That almost suggests that they've seen some sort of a concept art image that showcases like all of this actually happening at the same time. So we'll see what exactly happens here. But yeah, like I'd say probably the main thing here to read into is probably just cyberpunk aesthetic, that like if you're maybe thinking like hold back on the technology and we won't go too far, that maybe we are actually going like quite heavy into it, more than you'd actually expect. So there we go. And then the other thing with the as well with this actually, the Earth Avatar after Korra, is that Avatar News is now connecting this show back to what was shown to people at the Annecy Film Festival. This weird preview image that they were shown at that festival that had like an Earth symbol on it. That apparently was one of the fortresses that we saw in ATLA. I really want to know what the situation is with that. Like, that they were shown something that is more related to this. Because when he explained the whole confusion that happened around like why he was originally saying like Kyoshi movie first and stuff like that, he was highlighting the idea that there was a project that was directly like Earth Avatar related, and that seems to be what's happened here. So I'm wondering, like, will we ever see the whole Earth Avatar Fong's Fortress thing here? Obviously, like, whatever they were shown, I guess it didn't give off like just by itself like the future Avatar cyberpunk vibes or whatever. So I don't know if that was just they're showing a part of the Earth Kingdom Earth symbol to signify that, because I think previously we were all thinking that was more related to the adult Aang and Friends movie. Probably still kind of maybe makes a little bit more sense that maybe as Republic City is forming, there is some sort of an Earth Kingdom like attack, as like basically a new nation is about to form within the Earth Kingdom. Like, how did they deal with that at the time, and so on. Like, obviously the Promise deals with like aspects of those sort of topics, but you know, we were going into that. So I'm not sure about what's going on here. I think the film festival is showing the Aang movie concept art. The reporter said the director was Lon Montgomery. This gets into the whole idea of like when you're reporting on this stuff, is it people actually being like, and I saw it directly said itself that the director was Lon Montgomery, or am I connecting the dots that because at the time that was recent information that that's what it is actually about? I don't know. I think there's a lot of that actually happening. But what's going on here? Connection with the past lives, yeah, always comes up. I'd be surprised if just the immediate Avatar after Korra is the one to like deal with that at all. I think at the very least for the time being, that's just going to be kept as is, and we can see the past lives through the Aang and Friends movie. Aang can talk to the past lives. Any story you set with Korra that's like post book 1, before book 2, like there's a period with Korra where you can also do past life stuff, if you really, really want to, and then you can do past life stuff with basically all the other avatars. Like, that's the thing with the whole past life situation, is that it only affects Korra stuff going forward, and then Avatar after Korra. And it's honestly interesting from a Korra perspective that, you know, the next Avatar is only going to have Korra. So we're learning about the past lives. That's the entire intent of Avatar Studios going forward, is that the past lives are getting covered, and we have pretty much every combination you can imagine. Not to mention, like, Legends RPG is covering it. Avatar Generations, the mobile game that's coming out soon-ish, it's going to have new content related to Kyoshi, Roku, and the like. So we're not forgetting about these characters as we like move forward. Like, we're getting new Korra content. We're getting new content on all these characters, and that's why like I've never felt super strongly about the past lives being gone as being this thing that changes that much about like the franchise overall, because it's there for basically every other Avatar. So we have past lives all over the place. Like, that's the one thing that you can sort of see connecting everything together in Avatar Studios, is that we are getting to the point where we are covering kind of a little bit of everything, in all sorts of media, if you kind of do look into it. So, Earth Avatar after Korra, again, other than the setting, I think it's very difficult to predict what exact way they're going to go with it, other than the typical conversation about uh, technology, the traditions being forgotten. I would actually almost find it interesting if they managed to find some way where like the traditions are actually like really neatly incorporated into an extremely modern world, which if there are energy benders around would almost suggest that that's the case. A lot depends on the spirit world in this era and what's going on with that. How does that work in a kind of cyberpunk aesthetic? That's going to be somewhat interesting. Um, and a lot depends on obviously Korra's legacy as the Avatar. She's obviously at where we are right now in book 4, the comics. Is a very accomplished Avatar who's accomplished a lot in a couple of years. But I think it's going to be kind of defining for her as a character what she manages to actually accomplish with the spirits on a broader scale. That, okay, she's opened the portals, let the spirits back in. She'll always be remembered for that. But does she achieve a peace between humans and spirits? How in like 10, 20 years on from this decision, how does the world look because of that decision and how it was made? In terms of like humanity interacting with spirits and stuff like that. That's going to be the most interesting thing. So yeah, we have to wait and see how that's going to go, because you obviously expect as we go forward into really advanced technology that basically Republic City, probably your like Zaufus of the world, are going to be your extremely technologically advanced cities that are the full-on like cyberpunk cities. And surprisingly, I think based on kind of almost the way we're going, you actually expect Ba Sing Se to actually probably be one of the more old school cities going forward. So like a lot will depend on like what happens when it comes to like just the modernization of the Earth Kingdom, which needs to happen in Korra's era. How much of the Earth Kingdom gets impacted as we go through these like 100 years of advancement and stuff like that. Because it'd be kind of crazy if like you go to that era and Ba Sing Se is literally known as being the most like traditional place on the planet because it just hasn't like advanced that much. That's interesting. Yeah, the whole Avatar and a sibling plot's always quite interesting. Do we think they'll ever make games that provide new Avatar story content? That is interesting because like we know for sure, we know actually both officially and unofficially that multiple video games are in development. Because during the big podcast interview from Mike and Brian from last year, Brian actually did say that there are like video games in production, like multiple. So we know that I think they're planning quite a broad scope of that. I think Avatar is so untested in video games in terms of what is possible or not. It's kind of hard to imagine us getting sort of our, Jedi Fallen Order-esque game for Avatar where it tells a truly new, unique story. But I think we can get there eventually, definitely. Earth Kingdom. How do you think the show would handle the new democracy that it seems to imply to be heading in? Yeah, that is the interesting point for like Korra as well. That's a big point from Runes of the Empire, is that the whole plot there was basically we want democracy in the Earth Kingdom and like elections, elected officials across the Earth Kingdom, so we're not just focused on the Earth King. But it's maybe a little bit too soon to jump straight into that. So we're going to see this slower rollout of that across the Earth Kingdom as the, I suppose, eras progress. And the one thing you maybe worry about is that, like, is it for sure going to happen? Or is this just, like, trying to keep things the way they are for even longer? I'm guessing we'll see it actually begin to happen. I wonder how it would affect it, because the Earth Kingdom, like, in basically every era that we know about, is pretty much, as far as we can go back, known as the place where Ba Sing Se is the leadership, and it has basically no influence on the rest of the Earth Kingdom, and so it's never a connected nation. And then if you had like governors or whatever in each of these sections of the Earth Kingdom working together, it would be sort of interesting to see a united Earth Kingdom, what it could do given that it is the biggest nation, and how that works given that like right in the middle of the Earth Kingdom is United Republic as well. So there's that. What's the question here? What scene do you think the live action show will recreate? Big question, but like the live action show, they're just gonna, I think, attempt to do all of the key stuff from book one and then add in bits and pieces from other content that we know they have. Like there's going to be changes, there's going to be additions, stuff left out. That's just the way that show is going to be. I suppose like that is interesting to talk about now, because like we pretty much have to be expecting news on the Netflix show like any like week now, because they've got to get that going, because I think all the like kind of rumored insider information is sort of suggesting that the release of that show is probably more like in the kind of summer this year. At least that's what I've kind of heard some people say. I don't think there's too much concrete information, but they got to get it out there eventually. Yeah, the core comics have left like a lot kind of open to still be explored, which is why the one shots are going to be interesting to see if they in any way touch upon where we're going next. Because I almost feel like if you do a Korra movie, it's still, you've got a lot to try and cover in just like a movie for Korra. Whereas Avatar is a little bit more kind of focused, and I think you have a little bit more room to focus on, because you've got Republic City and then not that much else, whereas Korra has all this moving kind of political stuff going on and stuff that we want to see happen. So Korra like has a lot of ground to work with, and I wonder, will they give any of that to the comics to actually kind of work with? That is an interesting question. Do you think there could be a world war? Like, I'd struggle with the idea, like, will they do that? Like, actually have it be where, like, Korra, like, somewhere in the transition of Korra's era into the new Avatar's era, there is just, like, a massive war. I don't know, well, they did it with Wan, the first Avatar. Like, it's not impossible that they do it. I do have a feeling, though, they'll make Korra have an era that has at least an okay transition into the new era. Maybe not absolutely perfect, but that there's not huge problems like that necessarily. Maybe the world maneuvering, heading in that direction slightly, that the new Avatar needs to avert, but we'll see what happens. Weddings. Yeah. Well, will they do any animated weddings for anything? I think there's a chance. Like, I don't think they'll have like the full plot of any of these movies just be about like the wedding of Korra and Asami, the wedding of Katara and Aang. But I can see them maybe like ending one of those movies with something like that. That the threat for the movie is dealt with, and it's like, we dealt with it just in time, we can make the wedding still happen, and you end on this really kind of fun kind of like wedding moment for, say, Katara and Aang. If it is YA, it probably is like quite close to happening for those two, given that they've been in a relationship for quite a while already and stuff like that. So I think there's room to do it. It's just like, it will be the fun ending of a movie rather than like a particular plot focus as such. I kind of feel it's maybe more likely for Katara and Aang potentially, or like Mei and Zuko, maybe than Korra and Asami. It depends how many projects Korra is going to get in terms of animation. I think probably is what it comes down to. But you know, if we do get, say, like 2 projects for Avatar, 2 projects for Korra, they might do it. Because like there's probably a sense where they feel they owe Korra-Sami fans like Korra-Sami content in animation, and I think they want to do that to kind of in a way make up for what they kind of couldn't quite get done right at the end of the show. Something along those lines. So that could be quite cool. To see what exactly they do, but you know, that's the situation. Then I suppose one of the last things I want to talk about is just, like, okay, let's see this is locked in as 2025. We get our YA Aang and Friends movie and Earth Avatar after Korra. What will they, or what should they have the lineup be for 2026? What should they do? Like, given that, like, we roughly know there's like a Zuko movie on the horizon, there's a Korra movie, a Kyoshi, and probably a few other things. Do they immediately follow up the HLA movie with another HLA movie, or do something else? I know Avatar news was heavily suggesting that, like, he's always heard that the Zuko movie is number 2, but I don't think he's super confident necessarily about that. And like, is that the really idea? And then the not mainline show that is potentially like a spin-off type thing, what is that actually going to be? What should they do that about? Because, like, I would have said like Kyoshi like miniseries, but if they're planning a Kyoshi movie, I'd be surprised if they did a Kyoshi miniseries and then a movie. So what's that going to be? Because the other thing as well is that, like, this is getting a movie. I think this almost got forgotten in the middle of all of this, is that he did mention in that post that it's getting a series and then it's getting a movie later on. Now, I took that to probably mean that it's maybe this, or maybe like the 2028 movie. But it is interesting that is there. I'd probably be inclined, like, if I was doing it, I'd probably do like a Korra movie for year 2, and then have your Zuko movie down here, just for a little bit more kind of variety type thing, just to kind of show that you are willing to move around a little bit. Not mainline show, so it's like spin off mini series. Like, who are we kind of like thinking for this? Because I took this to sort of mean like it probably isn't about an Avatar, is probably my guess. Just to, in a way, to show that Avatar Studios isn't just doing stuff where the main character is always and forever an Avatar. The Avatar can still be in this show, but not as like the main character. It could be just something that it's very difficult to predict. Otherwise, not sure. Because, like, you obviously have like stuff like big backstories. Like, I think I've already seen them mentioned here, like Iroh backstory series, Red Lotus backstory series. Those are probably like the two like really, really obvious ones where you actually do have a lot of content. It is a little bit more anthology based in that it would cover quite a bit of ground. In that, like, the Iroh backstory series, if you were to do it, would have to like characterize Liu 10. You'd probably actually go back and do probably a little bit of Iroh and Ozai dynamic as well, just to characterize Iroh even more. Red Lotus backstory is interesting, that you probably want to include stuff like Zaibao, where the splintering off from the White Lotus actually specifically happened, which is interesting in that it happens right in the middle of like the Aang era. The way the timeline on that works is kind of quite interesting in that, like, Zaibao is like theoretically like around in the Avatar timeline, like roughly kind of in a way where we are now. So you have to get into like that stuff, some of the Unalaq stuff as well. There is potential here, like, the people are saying the Roku stuff. So, like, what if this is like Roku? I'll say so, that's like Zaysan. Maybe what's going on there? That could be interesting. Depending on how they do it. We'll see what exactly like they try and go for. But like I said, I'd maybe lean more in the direction of like, yeah, this is probably the most ideal way to do, say, like an Iroh series. Let's see, how much older is Zaibao compared to Unalaq and Zahir? if I remember correctly, there's some reference. I think it's in the third of those Avatar Legacy books, Legacy of the Fire Nation. Iroh literally references Xiaobao as if like he knows him. So they're at least at the age where like I don't know if that suggests that like Xiaobao is the same age as Iroh or like it's young man like Xiaobao at that point, but it very much is the idea that like Xiaobao should be like an adult where we are like basically right now in the comics, and especially as we go into like the series. So like there is probably the potential that maybe the splitting off we hear like in the background of the movie that like Red Lotus has formed or something like that. There is the potential here if you want to do that. That's actually a good idea there. Is that again part of the Red Lotus backstory would probably go up pretty much to fill in the gap properly. Is like you end with them being captured after failing to properly kidnap Korra. So like that would be like a really cool way to end it, where like you know where their story goes after this, and you see them get captured when they were introduced, breaking out of prison basically. So yeah, there's that. And then yeah, say 2027 they go to Zuko movie, and then they potentially have a third proper show. Now it's unclear if this is going to be a season 2 of the Earth Avatar show or something like that, or if it's the start of a new show. What do they do here with this? In my mind, this is probably where you do your sort of like second or other kind of ancient Avatar, like go back to the early Avatars. I think that's a good way to do it, because like that, by the time you get here, like you're advancing the show forward, you've covered a little bit back and forward of like the main stuff we're familiar with, leaving pretty much the early timeline as being maybe some of the stuff that isn't particularly fleshed out. So like this is probably maybe your time to do that. This maybe is actually a decent idea for not mainline thing, is maybe to just cover the timeline of early like after one. Is a good option to do stuff here, as like a mini series kind of anthology type thing. But who knows? The one problem with all of this is that like these are a lot of the really fan demanded things, and a lot of the times they don't tend to give us the stuff that like we really really want. And then yeah, the projects like Kyoshi movie, would it be better as a series? I don't really know. It depends on what story they want to tell, how exactly they're going to do it and stuff like that. But to me, that's probably like a decent like idea of like if something like that was the way the first years actually went, like two ATLA movies, a Korra movie, advance the show forward with an Earth Avatar series, some sort of a spin-off thing covering a key backstory that we want to know about, and then the other show to fill in like a gap somewhere in the timeline. That seems like a good idea, with the idea that you have potentially like a second core project, a Kyoshi movie, and all this other stuff on the horizon as well. So there is that. Yeah, that's actually an interesting one. Yeah, I suspect I'll do the next Fire Avatar to complete the kind of a series directly focused on an avatar of each element. So Aang was air, Korra was water, Earth Avatar next, and then will they do the one after that? That would be kind of interesting. That could be something kind of interesting. I'd almost expect that like they might do that as like sort of like that's like the end of Avatar or something like that when they finally do that like no other Avatar. But you know, who knows how big and broad their plans are for that sort of stuff. We don't even know. But it's hard to predict. Like the way I kind of view the way a lot of this project stuff is up in the air and stuff like that is that we could go skip ahead a couple of months, and we could maybe realize that like a Kyoshi project is much sooner than we think. The Korra project could very well be one of these ones. It just he's not allowed to say what exactly the details are, and so on. Um, but yeah, that seems to be sort of like the idea. What do you think the new timeline of the new FC novels will look like? So I assume the next one. After Yang Chen, like I said earlier, I think Roku does make sense to be next because he's sort of your other main obvious avatar. And once you cover Yang Chen like that, suddenly Roku is the least developed of like the other avatars that we know about. So you probably do need to cover him a little bit more now that the Legends RPG information is out there, and his era is a little bit more interesting. That would make a lot of sense. And then maybe that's the point. Like FCE does some Roku novels, and maybe that's where he ends his run on the novels, and then we swap over to a different writer for some other stuff. I lean more towards Roku getting an animated project. It's definitely possible because you do sort of wonder, like, okay, Avatar Studios worked with Magpie to develop all this Roku era information, meaning to some extent they must have had some of this planned internally for bigger reasons than just that game. So does that maybe suggest there is a Roku kind of series on the horizon? Maybe this mini series is more of a like Roku doesn't need a full like 2 or 3 season show, so we can just do a mini series to cover some of the key things that otherwise you don't know about with Roku. That's the possibility here as well. There's always the possibility of just sort of like an anthology type show, like a Halo Legends type thing, where it's just a bunch of little spin-off Tales of the Jedi type thing, where it just can go in at different timelines, and it's one series, but it covers like a lot of little stories, which I think is probably one of the better things they probably could and should do, to just show that you're willing to go in or around and stuff like that. Have you ever heard of a Kurok project happening? I don't think we've heard anything, but is there a possibility? Like, in my mind, like, I don't know if you can do 2 novels based on what is left of Kurok's story to tell. I think you could do 1 more book to cover like the stuff with Umi and the kind of final stage of his life. And I think that's definitely a good thing, and probably one that you should do, just direct Kurok focus. So there's a possibility there. Thoughts on Kurok being in season 1 of the live action show? It makes sense what they seem to be trying to do, fleshing out the kind of allusion to Kurok that was already in the show, and just utilizing the information that we have at the moment right now. Yeah. Franchise needs its name. Yeah, definitely. That's probably the big thing. I'll just cover that somewhere here. Yeah, I'll just kind of do that here. So like, so the problem is like we can't use just Avatar, obviously. So is it Avatar Legends, Avatar Generations, Avatar Verse? They use on the podcast a lot. Like, what are they going to call some of these projects? Like, when we finally get the title of this, what is the title of this going to actually be? Like, is this just going to be like ATLA movie subtitle? Is this going to be Avatar Legends Aang? Is this going to be, what? That's sort of the problem that I think we're facing here. Where for Avatar and Korra project, it's fine, because you can just use the already existing sort of licenses of ATLA and Legend of Korra subtitles. But when it comes to this Earth Avatar show, what's this going to be? Is this going to be like Legend of Name? And that's just the show? Is it going to be Avatar Legends and then like Name or something like that? That's sort of what we're kind of beginning to encounter here, of like, they probably need to make this move now to align everything a bit better, to do stuff going forward. Because as was mentioned in the sort of like chat there, if we finally get to the idea of like, say we do novels on Avatar, like say Zito, are we really going to call the book technically have this kind of like title that's like Avatar the Last Airbender, like Legend of Zito, which is book like 8 in Chronicles of the Avatar? Like, that's just like silly at that point, because that's still attached on the Yang Chen stuff and the Kyoshi stuff right now, and it feels like this barely really exists, because like that's technically what's written on these books. It's Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Dawn of Yang Chen, and then on the bottom it says Chronicles of the Avatar. When I think the franchise is leaning towards Avatar Legends being the actual name that they want to go for, and I think it's the one that fits probably the nicest, and they're gradually beginning to use it, but it still feels like they want to use this only for like merchandise and not for like mainline stuff, and I think that's the kind of worry of like it again. It works to use ATLA and Korra for movies about those projects, but you need to be a bit better for some of the newer stuff and in terms of what you're doing, just so you avoid all of this weird stuff of like, I'm sure you guys have seen it over the last couple of weeks with the Blue People 2 movie out in the cinemas and stuff like that, and being talked about a lot. There's a lot of like, wait, which Avatar are you talking about? Because obviously our franchise is the more kind of like respected one, but that is the sort of like mass like appeal in terms of like everyone's going to see it and it's making like lots of money type thing. And there is that kind of confusion about the sort of like, you know, just sort of quality versus just the sheer amount of people who know about it and what's what. And especially when like a lot of the titling and the ideas for stuff seem to be leaning towards like Blue People Avatar is also doing like water, and then fire is like planned for like the next one. It's gonna get pretty confusing. So there is a need to sort of like decide on this stuff, like I think sooner rather than later, to actually like fix and decide on what this stuff actually is. So yeah, they need to work on that. Yeah, but Blue Korra, Cosmic Korra, of course. So you know, there's that. The titling definitely needs to change. Do you think Avatar Studios will have a Yang Chen project? I think it's definitely possible. Like I think everything is on the table for Avatar Studios. Yang Chen, just because the second book is literally like, we assume, coming out this year, I assume they'll maybe wait a little bit to do more on Yang Chen. But I can also see how like some of the Yang Chen, especially the way the era works, how she is as an avatar, could work actually quite nicely as a series, if you want to go for it. This is where like I think something like where am I gone? You know, an anthology series is potentially a way to have animated content involving the likes of Yang Chen, Kuruk, maybe even Roku, where you don't want to devote, say, like 12 episodes to like a big story with them, because maybe you don't have more of an idea for that. But people want to see some of these other avatars like in action. And so, you know, tell a short animated story involving a Yang Chen that covers a little bit more, covers some of the other stuff. Kyoshi, I think, makes sense to be a movie because there's so much of her life left that there's absolutely room to tell a big story there for her. Whereas maybe Kuruk feels like maybe there is only like one or two big points left in his story overall. Hmm. Yang Chen came out with no delays. Do you think Avatar Studios did much with it? I think everything we know sort of points to the fact that that book was like made in full collaboration with Avatar Studios, which I think helps to explain why there was a bit of a gap between Kyoshi Book 2 and Yang Chen Book 1. In that, like, they took away sort of like, it's sort of like FCE with Mike DiMartino. He obviously still played some sort of a role in there somewhere, but they seem to let FCE do a little bit more of the work on this book. And then I assume just had the support of Avatar Studios for a lot of the other stuff. So I think Yang Chen probably is an example of probably like Avatar Studios working smoothly with one of the projects, because when Avatar Studios like activated, they weren't shutting down projects that were already sort of in production, instead of just like, oh yeah, we're going to do another novel, but now we have Avatar Studios to back it up, instead of you'll just like have some meetings with Mike and Brian every so often. So I think that probably is an example of just like, yeah, the Avatar Studios cycle actually working pretty well. History of Nations. Yeah. There's a few key like historical things that would be kind of nice to see. Obviously, the way the world ends up turning out post the war from Wan's era. Formation of the Southern Water Tribe. What exactly happened when that specifically formed. If they could find some way to tell the story of like, show us like old Bossing Say, and like the crystals and stuff like that, that would be kind of cool. There's some of that sort of world building stuff that is actually like very, very cool. Let's see. Before it was confirmed that Karuk died at 33, how did the fandom put it together? This one, if I remember correctly, Legend of Korra website had the Welcome to Republic City game, which had a bunch of fact files for characters, including one for like the 4 avatars, actually I think 5 avatars before Korra. And I think in that, it said, what was it? It worded something in a way where it said that like Karuk was like somewhere in the region of 400 or 500 years before Korra. And because we knew Kyoshi's age, we knew Aang's age when he died, we knew, of course, Korra's age, Roku's age. Adding all that together, it basically came to like, it comes to like a certain amount that is like just under that number that was mentioned. And so the numbers left, leave it. It'd take me a while to look it up. I think in a video I explained it at some point. The logic is there. The fandom, we did figure it out. I just forget the exact way the wording actually worked. But we were able to use the other avatars' ages in combination with what it said about how far in the past Karuk was, to figure out that, like, oh yeah, the only way that this works is that he either died, I think, that like, we basically had, I think, 2 numbers, and it was either like 33 or 32 or something like that. And I think we always went with 33 because it fit better with the way the information was. And then they just directly like confirmed it in the novels and stuff like that. But yeah, Welcome to Republic City game. I might actually be able to find it here real quick. Let's see. Lost Lore of Korra. This is the problem with the old information. It's actually so difficult to find some of this stuff. Let's see. Lost Lore of Korra, Karuk. Yeah. That's what it says. Yeah, it says Avatar Karuk was originally a waterbender born in the Northern Water Tribe almost 500 years before Korra. So we know the ages of basically all of the avatars before Karuk, and it works out in a pretty nice way, I think, how it actually works. Will I do the math here? Yeah, let's just do this. So of course you have 230 plus 70, which is Kyoshi's age plus Roku's age, plus 66, and then it says before Korra. So with this you have what, like 366. You have to factor in the 100 as well for Aang as well. So you have like 466, and then it says almost 500. So we take that to be like 499, and you can see the difference is 33. So that's pretty much the way we figured it out. Obviously there was a little bit of randomness there because we took the almost to its like exact degree, but because we see what Karuk looks like, he you have to sort of apply the most kind of age that there is kind of like to him, basically. That like, yeah, he looks 33 and like the pictures kind of like we have of him, and that does basically make sense. So that's basically the way that it worked, and we've had kind of situations like that before where we've helped to kind of figure out stuff, and that like the 230 age for Kyoshi before we officially got it basically is also a kind of error along those lines, where they said something along the lines of like this many years ago, and the only way it works with the amount of like people you have is for like a giant age like that. So in this case it actually works out accurately and makes a lot of sense overall. So there's that as well. So there's some interesting stuff like that. That's actually quite cool. And then yeah, we can figure out some other stuff as well. There's a few interesting things with numbers like that. Like I've covered some of it before in videos as well. Because like yeah, like as mentioned in chat there, the whole Sozin's Comet, you can actually use that in some interesting ways as well, because we know all of this stuff quite exactly, and we know what age like a certain character was when the comet actually comes. We can track backwards and actually be like, well, if the comet happens while this character is around, it actually like tells us like what age they are or will live to. It's kind of interesting kind of to talk about. I think I mentioned the whole comet thing in like my early speculation for what I don't know if it was the first Yang Chen book or if it was like early speculation for the second Yang Chen book, but you know, there's some interesting stuff like that. Yeah, unanimity during Sozin's Comet. Yeah, I actually really want to know what combustion bending is like enhanced by the comet, and how exactly that works. Like, is it, you know, how much of a power boost is it, and is it more of a just like it's quicker to fire boost, or is it actually harder to control because there's so much power? There's a lot to think about with you know, Sozin's Comet enhancement of like combustion bending, but who knows? Like the reason Sozin's Comet actually comes up in relation to it, is because unanimity theoretically will need to escape at some point, and given that they're pretty handily covered by having so many airbenders around them at this point, the comet would be one way to easily allow them to escape, and it theoretically is possible for the comet to be around this time. So that is a possibility. Be a little surprised, but it would be a pretty amazing event to sort of see the comet come into play before it's plot relevant hundreds of years into the future. Because people will obviously like know that like, okay, this comet I guess comes around occasionally, it empowers people, but no one's doing anything with it as far as we were aware. So it has to be tracked in history, I guess, for Sozin to know to use it in the first place. So there's some ideas, you can come up with. And so that's that. So yeah, I guess we're getting towards the end of the stream here. The plan for future live streams is basically when news comes out, I would like to cover it and discuss it in live streams going forward. But like the reason I didn't do many live streams in like the second half of last year, it's going to completely depend on news actually coming out. Now, I do have confidence this year that there will be a little bit more to talk about in live streams, and that we're obviously going to have to do some Azula discussion when the Azula comic comes out. If the description for the Azula comic is interesting when we finally get it, there might be some need to come in and do like maybe a Azula speculation stream. When we get the description for the Yang Chen book, maybe we'll do a more detailed Yang Chen book 2 speculation. If Yang Chen book 2 comes out this year, we can discuss that on stream. Some of the other comics as well. And if the Mako one actually hits this year, that's going to be pretty exciting. Avatar Y Schwartz, when it hits during the year, I hope to do maybe some stuff in relation to that. That might be a good idea for a stream. And then, of course, I think we are expecting some Avatar Studios news from one of the events this year. Like, will we get news at the February Investors event, marking 2 exact years since we've known about Avatar Studios? 2 years of this logo, basically. In a couple of weeks, will we get anything there? When we get to San Diego Comic-Con in July, will they say anything there? When we get to New York Comic-Con in October, will they say anything there? It feels like this is the year they probably have to actually say something. So, if they do say anything of note, any visuals where we can actually speculate about it, that would be something that we can also kind of come on and do a live stream for. Same goes for like a lot of the video game stuff. Like, whenever Avatar Quest for Balance comes out, I plan to do videos on it. Maybe a live stream playing it if I can organize that. Avatar Generations is kind of the same. I have a feeling, maybe when it first launches, like, there might not be a lot of super interesting content, but there's the potential to do something there. I'm not really sure, but I think there should be there should be enough to do at least a couple more live streams than last year. But a lot is going to depend on delays not happening, and what did we discuss earlier on, that a delay has already happened this year. We already have a delay, which is not great, of course, at all. So that's important to note that we do have that. But yeah, that's the situation that we have going on. It's just waiting on news and hoping that this is the year where Avatar Studios begins to feel a little bit more like it's an actual thing that we can properly talk about, and it's not just entirely like theoretical, that like it's a lot of nice ideas. And I think the first thing that needs to happen for sure is you got to name this movie. You have to name this movie. I think every time I've said what this movie theoretically is, I have used some different combination of like adult, young adult, Aang and Friends, Aang and Co, Team Avatar movie, ATLA movie, Avatar The Last Airbender movie. Everyone says it differently. We need a title to refer to this as. And it kind of would feel a little bit weird as like we're getting into this sort of, we're going from start of the year is kind of like almost 3 full years. By the end of the year, we'll be like, it's only 2 years until the movie. We probably should begin to get this sort of stuff. So hopefully that happens. And then if the show is also planned for 2025, this should get announced this year. Like they realistically, like if they can announce this last year for October 2025, this will have to get confirmed at some point as well. So there's that. Now, in immediate news, like we do know that like there is news about Avatar Generations coming very, very soon. So look out for that as well. So there's that. Yeah, social media, website, they definitely need that. Avatar Generations has a website that, yeah, needs a couple more updates for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm not, like, in terms of the direct next stream, I don't think I'm planning it for like the next week or the week after. Like, again, I think my plan at the start of last year was to attempt to do one a month, and that's going to probably remain my plan still. I'll do them more regularly if news continues to hit. So tentatively, at some point in February, I'll plan some sort of a stream. But I don't really know how that exactly is going to play out necessarily. But, I should have some interesting videos coming up soon, in that, like, I'm expecting my Avatar loot crate to finally arrive, so I can do a video on that. I'm expecting my Avatar Legends stuff at some point. It hasn't shipped yet for me. My Avatar Legends physical items still hasn't shipped yet, but theoretically that should be before the end of this month. That should be a cool video. And then beyond that, I think we're just waiting for stuff. The obvious news that we're expecting. But yeah, I'll wrap it up there. And we can go on our way. So yeah, thanks to everyone for coming out to the stream today. Nice to kind of get back to it after not having done one since, I think, like, was it July? I think was the last stream I did. So it's been quite a while. But it's always nice to do these. Especially now that I didn't mention this, but I have a second monitor now. So it's a lot easier to kind of like keep track of things now that I can have stuff open like all time on one monitor and mess around with other stuff on another monitor. But there it is. So yeah, thanks for coming out to the stream, everyone. But that's been it. Bye.